Before sunrise, the soldiers arrived. No warnings, no statements, just boots, trucks, and a fear no one could explain. A quiet town in Brazil, Varginha, lay beneath a warm January sky. Its streets calm, its days drifting by in a peaceful rhythm. Life had always moved gently here, predictable, ordinary until something extraordinary fell from the heavens. It began as a shimmer on the horizon, a long, metallic shape dragging a pale veil behind it, moving as if weighed down by an invisible force. No engines roared. No sound echoed, only silence, stretching across the fields, as though the world itself had paused to watch. A week later, 3 young women stumbled upon a being unlike anything they had imagined. Small, fragile, trembling, its crimson eyes held a depth that unsettled them, softened them, all at once. In that quiet moment, the town of Varginha became something else entirely not. Just a dot on the map, but a question the world still whispers about, because sometimes what falls from the sky leaves more than a mark. It leaves a story that refuses to fade. Chapter 1: The Quiet Town. Varginha rested under the warmth of a January sky, a small town whose days flowed like soft water over smooth stones. The streets were narrow and winding, lined with low houses painted in gentle pastels, their roofs catching the sun in slow glimmers of orange and gold. Birds traced lazy arcs above the town square, and the scent of fresh bread and coffee curled through the morning air, mingling with the soft hum of life unfolding. Here people moved at their own pace. Children ran barefoot over dusty roads, their laughter light as the gentle tinkling of wind chimes. The elders sat beneath trees that had watched generations grow, nodding to familiar faces and sharing quiet smiles. Life in Varginha was simple, predictable, and safer. So it seemed. The town had always felt sheltered, as though the hills and farmlands that surrounded it created a cocoon, keeping distant troubles at bay. Yet, beneath that quiet rhythm, there existed a subtle heartbeat of curiosity. Farmers tilled their fields and occasionally paused to squint at the horizon, wondering about clouds that drifted unusually or shadows that moved too slowly. The sky above Varginha had always seemed ordinary, patient, endlessly watching. But sometimes, the ordinary was only a veil for the extraordinary. It began with a shimmer, subtle, almost shy, that brushed across the morning horizon. It was a glint of metal, a line stretching longer than any plane should be, moving in ways the eye could not immediately follow. People poussait, instinctively raising heads to the sky, and then shook off the sensation, blaming the morning sun or the heat rising from the earth. Yet, some noticed it. Among them was Carlos de Souza, a young amateur pilot who often wandered the edges of the airstrip outside town. Eyes lifted to clouds and open blue spaces, dreaming of distant places and the unexpected. Carlos saw the shape drift, long and cylindrical, shivering against the sunlight like a wounded bird caught in a windstorm. It left behind a pale trail, not smoke, not steam, but something in between, a soft veil that trailed as though it had a weight of its own. No engines rumbled, no gusts swept the fields below, only a deep, resonant quiet, as though the sky had swallowed sound and held it in secret. He followed it on instinct, the tires of his old truck kicking up dust along the farm roads. With every turn, with every rise over a hill, the metallic figure wavered, struggling, unsteady, as though searching for a place to rest. The earth beneath it seemed to recognize the arrival. Fields lay untouched, yet the grass along the edges of the road bent toward the craft as it passed. Small animals froze mid-step, ears pivoting toward the sky, sensing a presence they could not name. Birds took sudden flight, wings cutting through the air with a frantic urgency that left echoes in the silence. Even the wind seemed hesitant, brushing lightly over the rolling hills without disturbing the long grasses. Nature itself, in its own quiet way, acknowledged that something extraordinary had entered its realm. And then, just as quickly as it had appeared, it fell. Not with a crash, not with fire or flame, but with a gentle, almost sorrowful surrender. It touched the earth with a muted thud, sinking slightly into the dirt as if weary from a long journey. Dust rose in a pale cloud, curling and settling like soft smoke around broken pieces of something that was clearly not of this world. Carlos stopped the truck at the edge of the ridge, heart pounding with a strange mixture of fear and fascination. The fragments that lay scattered glimmered faintly in the sunlight. He lifted one carefully, marveling at its strange properties, bent onto his fingers, then sprang back as if alive, imbued with a resilience beyond comprehension. Before Ao could fully take hold, the distant rumble of engines reached him. Military trucks rolled into view, dust curling behind them in heavy clouds, their presence sharp against the calm morning. Soldiers spilled from the vehicles with a precision that spoke of years of training, their voices terse, rifles in hand, eyes wary and unwelcoming. They demanded distance, silence, a careful retreat from the scene. Carlos felt the weight of their authority pressing down like the sun above. Yet even as he stepped back, a part of him refused to look away. There was a story here, one the world had not yet been allowed to hear, and he was witnessing its first whispers. Elsewhere, the town moved as if on the edge of a dream. Farmers Yuriko and Oralina were tending their fields when a gray, drifting shape appeared above the pasture. It moved slowly, deliberately, almost as though it existed in its own time. No shadow fell upon the ground. No wind stirred the crops, yet the object's presence was undeniable. It hovered, almost observing, before slipping out of sight behind distant hills. That small sighting, brief and silent, etched itself into the minds of the witnesses. Something was coming to Varginha, something that would touch their lives, though they did not yet know how or why. Eben and Holmes' life began to shift subtly. Windows caught flashes of light that seemed to linger for a heartbeat longer than they should. Doors, usually left open without thought, were closed with a sense of instinctive care. A dog barked at nothing and then froze, ears swiveling toward the empty air. And the people who noticed these oddities found themselves wondering, quietly, at first, then with a growing sense of fascination. What might be out there, just beyond the visible, just beyond understanding? In the afternoon, the sun draped the town in its golden warmth. The streets were still bathed in soft light, as though the town itself were holding its breath. Children played in the distance, their voices sweet and light, unaware of the mysteries that had brushed against the world above them. Shopkeepers went about their routines, sweeping doors and stacking bread, and old men sipped coffee on shaded benches, eyes lifted from time to time toward the horizon. Everything seemed ordinary, yet a current of anticipation threaded through the day, subtle, almost invisible, yet impossible to ignore. Evenings in Varginha carried their own quiet magic. The sky turned from warm gold to dusky lavender, then to a deep, endless blue. Shadows lengthened and mingled, stretching over the terracotta rooftops and narrow streets. Stars began to twinkle, delicate and patient, as if waiting to reveal their secrets. For a town that had always felt small and contained, the sky seemed suddenly vast, its endless expanse full of possibilities that the mind could only hint at. The feeling was not one of fear, but of wonder, a gentle pool at the edges of reality, inviting thought, imagination, and quiet reflection. And beneath this vast canopy, the town of Varginha continued to breathe, unaware that the days to come would stretch beyond the ordinary. Something had arrived, something that left an echo in the world, soft but enduring, like the tremor of a heartbeat in a silent room. It was fragile and fleeting, yet impossible to forget. Carlos de Souza, the farmers, the children, and the townspeople each carried a spark of awareness, a quiet, knowing that the ordinary was no longer enough, that the sky above held mysteries that might one day reach down and brush against their lives. Night settled over the town, gentle and still. The street lamps flickered on, casting soft circles of light onto cobblestones and the facades of small shops. Windows glimmered, reflecting stars and shadows alike. Somewhere in the distance, a dog whimpered softly, ears lifted. Somewhere beyond the hills, the metallic shimmer of the day's visitor lingered in memory, a trace of motion and presence that had not yet fully departed. Varginha, in its calm and quiet, had changed. The ordinary heartbeat of daily life continued, but it carried with it a newfound curiosity, a subtle restlessness, and the delicate thrill of the unknown. And in the deep silence of night, One could almost feel the sky watching, patient and eternal, holding stories that had yet to unfold. The quiet town, so small and unassuming, had become the stage for something extraordinary. Its streets, its rooftops, its very air seemed to hum with anticipation. Life, once simple and predictable, now carried the soft tremor of the impossible. And somewhere, just beyond the hills, something waited patient, silent, watching. Tomorrow, the sky would move again, and Varginha would begin to notice the first real stirrings of what had arrived. Chapter 2: The Falling Sky. Morning arrived softly, brushing Varginha in gentle golden light. The warmth of the January sun spilled over terracotta rooftops, kissed the green fields beyond the town, and lingered on the dusty roads. Everything seemed ordinary, familiar. Birds chirped in the trees, a distant dog barked, and the smell of fresh coffee curled through open windows. Yet, somewhere in the expanse of sky above the farmland, the ordinary had already begun to shift. Carlos de Souza, the young pilot with restless curiosity, had risen early as he often did. The air was still, carrying the faint fragrance of earth and distant rain, when his eyes caught a flicker of movement far above the horizon. At first, it seemed like nothing more than a trick of the light, a glint of sun caught on a passing plane. But as he watched, his heart quickened. The object was unlike anything he had ever seen, a long cylindrical shape glimmering faintly, as if forged from silver and glass. It shuddered across the sky, unsteady, tugged down by some invisible weight. Carlos knew instinctively that this was no ordinary aircraft. There were no engines roaring, no wings flapping through the air with familiar rhythm, only a strange, lingering silence that seemed almost alive, pressing gently against the ears, the mind, the skin. A pale veil trailed behind the object, curling like smoke that had learned to float without flame. He could not look away. Curiosity and awe tangled in his chest, pulling him forward as he started his old truck down the dirt road. Tires stirring the earth into soft clouds of dust. Fields stretched wide on either side, golden and green, rolling under the sunlight. Farmers, Eurico and Aurelina, were already tending their crops, the sharp smell of earth and grass rising to meet them. They paused mid-step when the long, gray shape drifted into view above their pasture. It hovered in the air with deliberate, almost ponderous motion. No shadow touched the ground, no wind bent the leaves. Yet, even without force or sound, its presence pressed upon them. Eurico's hand rested on his spade, fingers trembling just slightly. Aurelina's lips parted in quiet disbelief. Something was wrong, or perhaps something was entirely beyond the reach of right and wrong. Carlos followed the descent, heart thumping with a mixture of exhilaration and caution. The object shivered, a subtle wobble in its metallic frame, as though the sky itself were resisting it. And then, without warning, it sank, not with a crash, not with flame or smoke, but with a soft, almost sorrowful release. It touched the earth, gently, the ground accepting it with a muted sigh, leaving behind a shallow indentation, a scar on the familiar soil of the farmland. Carlos jumped from the truck, boots sinking into the dust, and stepped carefully toward the site. The field had transformed in a single instant. Where there had been only golden crops and soft soil, now lay scattered fragments, metal glinting in the sunlight, delicate yet unyielding. He knelt to lift one, running fingers across its smooth surface. It bent under his touch, pliable yet returning to its original shape as though it were aware of his curiosity. There was a warmth, almost imperceptible, pulsing faintly within it, as though it had a life separate from the world. His wonder was interrupted by a distant rumble engines, low and methodical, growing louder as they rolled down the dirt road. Military trucks appeared, their presence precise, deliberate, and imposing. Dust curled in heavy clouds around the tires, masking the earth and momentarily hiding the metallic fragments from view. Soldiers spilled from the trucks with practiced efficiency, voices sharp, rifles poised, eyes wary. They spoke little, gesturing for Carlos to step back, to keep away. There was no room for questions, no invitation for curiosity. The message was clear: witness, but do not interfere. Carlos hesitated. The fragments in the soil seemed alive, humming softly against his fingertips. He wanted to study them, to understand them. Yet the weight of authority pressed down like the midday sun. With a reluctant nod, he withdrew, keeping his gaze fixed on the strange object and its peculiar trail. Something extraordinary had fallen here, and the world had not yet been permitted to know. In the town, whispers began to ripple like soft currents across the streets. Windows were opened and closed with unusual care. Farmers spoke in hushed tones about lights in the sky, about shapes that moved too deliberately, too strangely to be natural. Children, unaware of the fear mingling with curiosity, pointed skyward, imagining stories of distant worlds and impossible machines. In these small gestures, the town was learning that reality could stretch, that ordinary life could brush against something beyond comprehension. By midday, more eyes were drawn to the sky. A gray shape drifted slowly above the pasture of Yuriko and Oralina. It remained suspended with eerie deliberation, neither casting shadow nor stirring the air. It seemed to study the land beneath, tracing invisible paths, as if recording each detail in silence. The farmers paused again, uncertainty pressing against them. They had lived long lives in Varginha, witnessing storms and droughts, laughter and grief. Yet nothing had prepared them for the calm intelligence of something that hovered without sound, without need, without explanation. Carlos returned to the ridge several times, each glance revealing subtle shifts. The fragments in the field reflected the sunlight differently now, some catching faint rainbows, others glinting in stark silver. The air held a faint metallic scent, delicate yet unmistakable, curling around the grasses and mixing with the warm January warmth. Birds moved cautiously through the sky, wary of the invisible presence. Even the wind seemed quieter, gentler, holding its breath in recognition of a visitor it could not name. As evening approached, the town of Varginha felt a gentle tension threading through its streets. Windows caught the last light of day, flickering with reflections of a sky that seemed a touch too wide, too deep. Dogs padded softly over cobblestones, ears alert. Children returned home, calling greetings to mothers and fathers who paused mid-task. Sensing the quiet difference in the air, something had happened, and though it could not yet be named, it had left a trace. Curiosity, faint but persistent, stirred in hearts and minds. At night, the sky over Varginha stretched endlessly. Stars began to twinkle in patient clusters, delicate and distant, as if watching the town with gentle, knowing eyes. Shadows pooled in the corners of streets and fields, not with menace, but with quiet mystery. And beneath this vastness, the metallic fragments lay quietly, scattered like secret memories awaiting discovery. Each bend in the strange metal hinted at stories untold, worlds unseen, and moments yet to unfold. Carlos returned home, boots dusty and hands tingling from the fragments he had touched. He could not sleep, not entirely, for the sky had changed in a way that whispered to him in the quietest hours. Something had arrived, and it would not leave without leaving its mark. In dreams, he saw the metallic shape floating above the fields, not moving as he remembered, but watching, observing, waiting. And in that quiet vision, he felt both awe and a gentle tremor of fear, not of danger, but of wonder of the impossible pressing softly against the familiar. The farmer spoke of the gray shape again, in hushed tones, leaning on spades and shifting in the dust. "It is not like anything I have seen," Yuriko murmured. Oralina nodded, eyes distant. "It is watching, or learning, or waiting? I don't know, but it is here." And in those words, a subtle realization spread through the town. Life, as they had known it, had quietly shifted. Varginha slept beneath a sky that seemed wider now, deeper, full of possibilities. The air hummed with subtle tension, a quiet energy that moved through streets, fields, and rooftops alike. Something extraordinary had touched the earth, and though it moved silently, invisibly, it had left its imprint, not in fear, not in chaos, but in quiet, persistent awe. And somewhere, beyond the farms, beyond the hills, the object waited, patient and unhurried, as if inviting the town to look, to wonder, and to remember that the sky could hold stories no one had yet imagined. The quiet town had learned something new. The ordinary world had shifted. And tomorrow, when the sun rose again, Varginha would find that the calm it once knew was only a memory. Fragile and distant, like a dream fading at dawn. Soon, the whispers would grow louder, and the town would see the first traces of something. Alive, something fragile and unlike anything they had ever known. Chapter 3. The Being in the Lot. The afternoon sun draped Varginha in a soft, golden warmth, the kind that seeped into the bones and settled there, leaving a quiet, comforting weight. The air carried the gentle scent of earth, dust, and distant blooms, blending with the faint, lingering tang of metal from the morning's mysterious arrival. Life moved slowly in this part of town. Children ran barefoot along the uneven streets, their laughter rising and fading like the gentle lapping of water against stone. Adults went about familiar routines, sweeping doorsteps, tending gardens, chatting over fences. It was ordinary, predictable, and safe, or so it seemed. 3 young women, Liliani, Valkyria, and Katia, walked home along a familiar street, their steps in sync with one another. Voices a soft harmony mingling with the distant sounds of a lazy town afternoon. They carried the lightness of youth in the sway of their shoulders, the ease of friendship in every glance. Their laughter came in gentle bursts, carried away on the warm wind. Yet even in this ordinary moment, a subtle tension threaded itself through the air, a quiet anticipation that they could not name. Liliane, walking slightly ahead, halted suddenly. Her eyes caught something crouched near a crumbling wall at the edge of a deserted lot. At first, it appeared almost human, a small figure hunched in shadow, fragile and still. But as their eyes adjusted, details began to sharpen, carving unease and wonder in equal measure. The figure's skin glistened faintly, like wet clay, stretched taut over a small, trembling frame. Its head was crowned with 3 subtle ridges that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. Its limbs hung loosely, almost as if it struggled to hold itself upright. And then their eyes met its own. The eyes were large, crimson, glassy, and impossibly expressive. They carried a depth that unsettled yet softened to the girls all at once. In that gaze was not rage, not malice, but confusion, vulnerability, and a quiet plea for understanding. Liliane felt a breath hitch, a shiver tracing the line of her spine. Valkyria's hand rose instinctively to her mouth, her heartbeat thrumming against her ribs like a whispered warning. Katia's steps faltered, dust curling beneath her sandals as she struggled to reconcile the ordinary afternoon with this surreal presence. A faint, sharp odor curled around them, chemical and acrid, making their stomachs knot. It was a scent of something unfamiliar, something not of this world, yet undeniably alive. The creature did not move toward them. It did not lunge. It simply quivered, caught between fear and curiosity, trembling as though aware of the fragility of its own existence. It was a being suspended in space and time, neither fully part of the town nor fully separate from it. Fear wove its way into the girls' instincts. Their legs, light moments ago with the ease of friendship, now carried the weight of survival. Without a word, they turned and ran, kicking up soft clouds of dust behind them, hearts pounding with a mixture of terror and awe. The world seemed suddenly louder. The scrape of sandals on dirt, the rustle of leaves, the distant bark of a dog, even the soft whisper of the wind through the cracked wall. Everything was amplified, colored by the intensity of the moment, yet the creature remained, still and silent, quivering in its place, watching them flee with a gaze that lingered long after their footsteps faded. Moments later, Louisa, their mother, returned to the lot. She was unaware of what had occurred just minutes before, yet the air struck her first, a bitter, chemical temps that made her eyes water. Her steps slowed instinctively, nostrils flaring as she took in the scene, and then she saw it. 3 delicate, deep impressions pressed into the damp earth. The marks were strange, each with 3 toes, unlike anything she had ever seen. They were precise, yet fragile, leaving the unmistakable signature of something not quite human. She knelt, running fingers lightly over the soil, tracing the shallow depressions, heart pounding with a mix of dread and wonder. From somewhere beyond the houses, the low rumble of engines returned. Military trucks moved methodically along streets that had seemed ordinary just hours before. Their presence was quiet but deliberate, as if the town itself had been placed under a careful watch. The soldiers moved with precision, their faces stern, voices clipped, commanding attention without needing to shout. Doors were closed, windows shuttered, and an uneasy hush spread through the streets. In the lot, the creature remained. Its small frame shivered in place, a fragile, trembling shadow amid the crumbling walls and dusted earth. Its eyes seemed to follow the movement of the world around it, curious yet wary, as though trying to understand the strange humans who had briefly intruded into its space. Its gaze lingered not on fear, but on the possibilities, the small gestures of recognition, the fleeting moments of connection that hinted at understanding beyond words. Liliani, Valkyria, and Katia, now hidden behind the corner of a nearby street, dared only brief glances. Their minds raced, piecing together memories of strange lights, the shimmering craft. The rumors whispered through the town, yet nothing, no story, no warning. No dream could have prepared them for the fragile reality of a living being whose presence defied comprehension. Their fear was real, but beneath it was a quiet awe, a recognition of the extraordinary brushing softly against the edges of the ordinary. As the sun began to lower, spilling long honeyed shadows across the lot, the town itself seemed to pause. The usual rhythm of daily life, the clatter of dishes, the hum of conversation, the distant cries of children faded slightly, replaced by a gentle awareness, a quiet recognition of the unknown. Something had entered their lives, something delicate, something alive, and the memory of it would remain long after the day faded into night. The creature shifted slightly, just enough to reveal the frailty of its frame. Muscles trembled beneath taut skin, and the faint ridges along its head caught the waning light, glimmering like distant stars trapped in clay. Its eyes, deep and crimson, reflected the soft gold of the sun, and in them lingered a story to vast forwards, a story of travel, of displacement, of a world beyond this one. It seemed to pulse quietly, with life, awareness, and curiosity, suspended on the fragile line between presence and absence. Louisa remained kneeling, tracing the strange prints, sensing the faint vibrations of life that lingered even when the creature was hidden. Something was here, and it was alive, and it had touched her world. She could not name it, she could not explain it, but the certainty of its existence pressed softly against her mind, leaving no room for doubt. The afternoon deepened into evening, and shadows stretched across the lot. The wind whispered softly through the cracked walls, carrying dust and the faint metallic temps of fragments left behind from the craft. Birds had long since quieted, sensing perhaps the fragility of this moment, and in the quiet, in the gentle settling of the world, the creature remained a silent presence, trembling yet observant, holding its place in the earth with an almost fragile dignity. The engines of the distant trucks finally faded into the background, though the sense of watchfulness lingered. The town of Varginha exhaled slowly, unknowingly, stepping back into the rhythm of ordinary life, even as extraordinary threads had been woven into its days. In bedrooms, kitchens, and gardens, people pused, thinking of lights, of strange shapes, of fleeting impressions, too delicate to fully capture. The ordinary world had not disappeared, but it had been forever altered. Night fell slowly over Varginha, the sky a deep canvas of blue, stitched with silver threads of stars. The air was cool, carrying the scents of earth and dust, of lingering warmth from the fading sun. Somewhere, in the lot, now empty of human eyes, the creature waited, fragile and still, observing the movements of a world it did not fully understand. Its gaze lingered in the darkness, reflecting both the sadness and the curiosity of existence, as though silently asking, "Do you see me? Do you understand?" The town slept beneath the velvet sky, unaware of the small, trembling witness tucked between walls and shadows. And yet, in dreams, in faint memories, in whispered conversations, Varginha carried the memory of something impossible, a presence so fragile, so vivid, that it would echo in the hearts of those who had glimpsed it forever. And somewhere, beyond the lot, beyond the houses, the first stirrings of understanding had begun. The town had been touched, gently but irrevocably, by something extraordinary. And life, once ordinary, would never quite be the same. As night deepened, the whispers would grow, and Varginha would awaken to the first shadows of secrets carried in uniform, moving quietly through the streets. Chapter 4. Shadows in Uniform. By the early hours of dawn, Varginha had settled into a quiet that felt both familiar and strangely expectant. The town's streets, usually alive with the slow stirrings of morning, were unusually still. Windows remained shuttered, doors closed with an uncommon care, and a soft mist hovered over the fields, curling around the trees and drifting along the empty roads. Even the birds seemed subdued, their calls soft, hesitant, as though the town itself were holding its breath. Rumors had begun to ripple through the neighborhoods like gentle waves. Whispers passed quietly from one kitchen to the next, from neighbor to neighbor, never spoken aloud but carried in glances, nods, and the subtle tension that hung in the air. Something had occurred in the lot the day before. A presence, a creature, something inexplicable, and the world, or at least the world the townspeople had known, had shifted. It began with the trucks. Military vehicles rolled quietly into the town, their tires raising soft clouds of dust that drifted over the cobblestone streets. The engines rumbled with a controlled power, low and steady, vibrating in the ground beneath the feet of those who paused to watch. Men in uniform spilled from the vehicles, moving with deliberate, careful precision. Their faces were serious, their voices clipped, and their eyes scanned every corner, every street, every shadow, as if they were searching not just for a thing, but for the memory of what had passed. People felt the presence of authority before they saw it. The hum of unseen radios, the faint click of boots against pavement, the quiet ordering of positions, all threaded through the town with a weight that pressed gently yet insistently on hearts and minds. There was no fear yet, only a soft unease, a question that could not be ignored. What had come to Varginha, and why were these men moving with such deliberate secrecy? Louisa, mother of Liliane, Belcaria, and Katia, watched from her doorway as the trucks rolled past. She clutched the edge of the wooden frame, her knuckles white, her eyes wide. Memories of the lot, the strange prince, the creature's trembling figure, all pressed into her mind. She could feel the subtle vibration of the earth beneath her feet, as if the town itself were aware of something larger, something just beyond understanding. And in that moment, she understood what her daughters had glimpsed, though she could not yet speak it aloud. Elsewhere, Carlos de Souza traced the paths of the morning, driving slowly through the hills where he had first seen the metallic craft. He paused at the edge of the field, eyes scanning the horizon, noticing small changes, fragments of metal, faint scorch marks in the grass, and the almost imperceptible shimmer in the air where the object had passed. The trucks had been there too, rolling past his vision like silent predators, moving with purpose, leaving behind an invisible trace of their own. In the streets, people whispered to one another in hushed tones. Some spoke of strange lights seen in the sky, drifting like lanterns without origin. Others told of shadows that lingered too long, figures moving silently where no one should be. Children sensed the subtle shifts, asking questions that adults could not answer, words lingering in the warm, still air of the morning. "Did you see it too?" one child asked softly, voice trembling with both awe and fear. And in the answers, or the lack of them, the town began to understand that something extraordinary had touched their lives. By midday, the presence of authority became undeniable. Streets were cordoned, not with barricades, but with silent, shifting shadows. Soldiers moved with efficiency, inspecting, observing, and occasionally directing townspeople with gestures rather than words. Conversations hushed immediately in their presence. Laughter, once bright and carefree, was tempered by awareness, by a sense that the ordinary rhythm of life had been interrupted. Even the air seemed heavier, carrying the faint metallic scent of the craft, the lingering perfume of something unknown, mixing subtly with the warmth of sun and dust. Stories began to take shape, whispered carefully between neighbors. There were accounts of another creature found near the park, its cries thin and quivering like a frightened child's. There were tales of transport vehicles moving under the veil of night, of corridors cleared in the hospital for reasons no one could name. Each story carried a blend of fear and fascination, and yet, despite the seeming chaos, the world continued with a strange order. The authorities moved with precision, every action measured, leaving behind questions that had no answers and footprints that led nowhere. Carlos, standing at the ridge once more, could see the town unfolding below him. Smoke drifted lazily from chimneys. Children played briefly before retreating indoors, and the metallic glint of the fragments in the lot caught the sunlight, winking faintly as though acknowledging his gaze. The men in uniform moved silently, watching, studying, and yet somehow missing the quiet magic lingering in the world. Carlos felt a mixture of awe and helplessness. He wanted to reach out, to understand, to communicate, but the invisible thread that connected him to the event felt both delicate and impossible to grasp. Back in the lot, the impressions of the creature's presence remained etched in the earth. The three-toed print, delicate and precise, pressed softly into the soil, waiting to be discovered, remembered, or perhaps understood. In the fading sunlight, the shadows of the walls stretched across the lot, mingling with the dust and fragments of metal. Somewhere in those shadows, the creature had paused, hiding, trembling, observing the world it had briefly touched. Its presence was quiet, fragile, yet undeniable, a whisper in a town now caught between reality and the impossible. By evening, the hum of engines faded, but the sense of watchfulness did not. Windows remained shuttered, doors closed with care, and the town moved with an almost ceremonial caution. Conversations were measured, eyes cast upward or toward the shadows, hearts attuned to the possibility that the extraordinary might arrive again. At one moment, without warning, even the children, tucked into beds with blankets pulled high, sensed a shift, the subtle presence of something unseen brushing against their dreams. Night descended over Varginha slowly, thick in velvet, draping streets, fields, and rooftops in a quiet blue embrace. Stars glimmered, distant and patient, as if watching, waiting. The lot lay silent beneath the moonlight, dust and fragments glinting faintly. Somewhere, hidden in the shadow of a crumbling wall, the creature remained, small and trembling, its gaze reflecting the soft silver of the stars. Though ensign, it observed the movements of the town, learning, waiting, and wondering. In bedrooms, kitchens, and gardens, the townspeople slept fitfully. Dreams were tinged with light, with moment, with a faint whisper of the impossible. For some, it was fear. For others, curiosity. And for a few, it was the quiet thrill of witnessing something extraordinary brush softly against their ordinary lives. By midnight, Varginha had become a town suspended in time, caught between the world it had always known and the one now quietly asserting itself. The streets were empty, the fields still, the shadows long and patient, and in the lot, in the delicate tremor of small limbs and the faint glimmer of 3 ridges on a tiny head, the extraordinary lingered. Not threatening, not aggressive, but alive, watching, learning, waiting for the day when connection might be possible. And somewhere, beyond the walls, beyond the fields, beyond the watchful eyes of uniforms, the town's curiosity began to grow, fragile and persistent, like seedlings stretching toward the sun after a long winter. Something had arrived, something fragile, something extraordinary, and in its quiet presence, Varginha had changed, forever caught in the soft glow of wonder, of questions unanswered, and of mysteries waiting patiently to be discovered. And as the town slept beneath the quiet sky, the first stirrings of understanding began to unfold, carried on the whispers of those who had glimpsed the impossible. Chapter 5. The Night of Uncertainty. Night in Varginha arrived gently, folding over the town like a soft, velvety blanket. The streets were quiet, the rooftops still, and the air carried the lingering warmth of a day that had seen the extraordinary brush softly against the ordinary. Yet, beneath the calm, there was a subtle tension, a quiet rhythm that the town could not name but felt deep within its bones. Something had changed. Something had arrived. And for the first time, the town felt it not in fleeting glimpses or distant rumors, but in the persistent, intangible weight of uncertainty. In homes across the town, windows were closed with care, curtains were drawn, doors locked, and families moved softly, almost instinctively. as if the ordinary clatter of a plate or the shuffle of feet might disturb the delicate balance of the night. Mothers whispered to children, telling them stories of bravery, of stars, of things unseen that existed quietly in the world, while all the while sensing a presence they could not name. Fathers paused in their routines, gazes drawn toward the horizon, minds restless with questions without answers. The town had become a place where the ordinary heartbeat of life had been interrupted by something far more profound. Carlos de Souza, unable to sleep, wandered once more toward the ridge overlooking the fields. The moon cast pale silver light across the landscape, stretching shadows from trees, fences, and rooftops into long, undulating shapes that seemed almost alive. The air was cool, carrying faint scents of earth, dust, and distant blossoms, yet underneath it all lingered something different, a metallic temps, faint and almost imperceptible, brushing against the senses like a whisper. From his vantage point, he could see the lot where the creature had first been glimpsed. The fragments of metal from the falling craft glimmered faintly in the moonlight, catching the silver glow as though holding on to some memory of what had arrived. The prints pressed into the earth were still visible, delicate impressions of 3 toes, fragile yet precise, and in the shadows, almost imperceptible against the crumbling walls and dusted ground. He felt the presence of something alive, small and trembling, observing him, waiting, learning. Elsewhere, the town stirred with its own awareness. Streetlights flickered softly, casting gentle pools of light onto cobblestones and rooftops. Dogs padded softly, ears twitching at sounds that were not immediately present. Noses lifted 2 scents carried invisibly through the night. Children shifted in their sleep, murmuring half-formed words of dreams filled with shapes, shadows, and silent watchers. Adults, too, moved restlessly in bed, sensing that something beyond their understanding lingered just beyond sight, brushing softly against the familiar outlines of their homes. The first ripple of disturbance came with a quiet movement of trucks along the distant roads. Soldiers moved deliberately, silently, checking streets, observing shadows, their presence both protective and forbidding. Engines hummed low, almost imperceptible, carrying a rhythm that seemed to echo through the still night. The townspeople, even those who had not seen the morning events firsthand, felt the watchful weight of their approach, understanding instinctively that the ordinary rhythm of life had been suspended. In the lot, the creature shifted. Its small body trembled against the cool night air, delicate and fragile. It had learned from the day, from the humans it had glimpsed, from the distant sounds of engines and movement. Its gaze, wide and crimson, reflected the silver moonlight, carrying an intelligence that belied its size, a curiosity tempered with caution. Each movement was deliberate, subtle, as though the creature understood the fragility of its presence and the weight of observation pressing upon it from all directions. Liliani, Valkyria, and Kachia, restless in their homes, could not entirely quiet their thoughts. In whispers to one another, voices soft and careful, they shared fragmented memories of what they had seen. The crimson eyes, the trembling limbs, the strange ridges along the head, each detail vivid, etched into their minds with clarity that refused to fade. Even in sleep, the images lingered, mingling with dreams of metallic shapes drifting through distant skies, of soft trails of mist curling like delicate smoke, and of the quiet, patient watchfulness of something beyond comprehension. Night deepened, folding the town further into its soft embrace. The air was thick with anticipation, carrying the subtle scents of earth, dust, and the faint metallic tang of fragments left behind from the craft. Shadows stretched across streets and rooftops, merging with the darkness, moving gently in the light of the moon. It was a night alive with quiet possibility, a night that seemed to hold its breath, waiting for the town to notice the subtle rhythm of something extraordinary unfolding just beyond reach. Carlos returned again to the ridge, drawn by the soft pull of curiosity he could not resist. The fragments glimmered faintly, as if remembering the journey that had brought them to this place. The earth itself seemed aware of the presence, each blade of grass bending ever so slightly toward the fallen craft. He felt the weight of the unknown pressing softly against his chest, a delicate tension that left him breathless with anticipation. In the shadows of the lot, the creature stirred again, small movements that spoke of life, of awareness, of the fragile intelligence that had touched this town and now lingered among them. Across the fields, Yuriko and Aurelena stood silently, watching the sky. The gray shape had not returned, but its memory lingered like a faint echo, shaping the world around them. The wind whispered through the crops, soft and hesitant, carrying the sense of something unseen, gentle yet insistent, reminding them that life, as they had known it, had shifted quietly into a realm of uncertainty. Their hearts were attuned to the rhythm of the night, sensing the delicate presence that had moved through their town and the quiet possibility that it might come again. In the lot, the creature's gaze swept slowly across the shadows, absorbing the movements of the night. Its eyes, crimson and wide, reflected not fear, but a deep curiosity, a longing for understanding that transcended language and reason. The prince in the earth told its story, subtle yet undeniable, and the fragments scattered around whispered of journeys that had taken it far beyond the fields and rooftops of Varginha. In the gentle glow of the moonlight, it seemed almost to pulse with life, holding the memory of its descent and the faint hope of recognition from the humans who had glimpsed it. Time stretched gently, the night deepening into a soft, unbroken rhythm. The town moved with careful caution, aware yet unable to name the presence that lingered in its streets, fields, and rooftops. The ordinary and the extraordinary now coexisted in fragile balance, threads of wonder and tension weaving through each home, each heartbeat, each quiet step across the cobblestones. As the hours passed, a subtle awareness settled over Varginha. Windows glimmered with faint reflections of stars. Doors remained closed with gentle care, and families moved quietly in their homes. The night carried questions without answers. A soft tension threaded through dreams, and the persistent sense that the ordinary had been touched by something far beyond comprehension. And in the lot, under the silver gaze of the moon, the creature remained, small and trembling, yet alive, patient and quietly watching, waiting for the next ripple of curiosity, the next gentle step toward understanding. The town, wrapped in the quiet blue of midnight, had learned something new. Life would continue, morning would return, and sunlight would warm streets and rooftops once again. But the memory of the day's arrival, of the trembling being in its silent presence, would remain lingering like the faint glow of stars, delicate yet persistent. Varginha had been touched by the extraordinary, and that touch would echo through nights like this one, quiet, patient, and impossible to ignore. Even in the stillest moments, when the streets were empty and the fields lay silent, the town could feel it. A presence fragile and watching, moving softly between the shadows, observing, learning, and leaving behind traces that could not be forgotten. And in that presence, the heart of Varginha beat differently, attuned to a world that had shifted, subtle yet irrevocably, into something richer, stranger, and endlessly full of wonder. And when the morning arrived, the town would awaken to the first tangible signs that the extraordinary had not left but was quietly threading itself into their lives. Chapter 6: Signs and Whispers. Morning arrived in Varginha quietly, almost reluctantly, as if the town itself needed time to awaken from the weight of the extraordinary. Sunlight filtered through mist that lingered low over fields and rooftops, softening the edges of buildings, trees, and fences. The town exhaled gently, stretching its streets and homes toward the new day. And yet, even as life began to stir, there was a subtle tension threading through the air, a quiet hum of awareness, a feeling that the ordinary was not quite the same as it had been the day before. The lot, where the creature had been glimpsed, remained a delicate scar on the landscape. Dust swirled lightly in the pale morning light, glinting faintly where fragments of metal lay scattered. The three-toed prints pressed into the earth were still visible, impressions of something that had been both present and fragile, delicate and deliberate. Anyone passing by might notice them or not, but the markings carried a weight that seemed to linger, faintly pulsing in the cool air as if remembering the moment when the extraordinary had brushed against the ordinary. Lilian, Valkyria, and Katia walked carefully toward the lot, their conversation hushed. Each step was deliberate, as if they were crossing into a threshold where the familiar and the impossible overlapped. Their thoughts were filled with the memory of crimson eyes, trembling limbs, and the faint metallic scent that had hung around the creature like a whisper of some faraway world. The girls moved quietly, almost afraid to disturb the delicate traces left behind, yet drawn irresistibly forward by curiosity, by wonder, by the quiet need to know. The lot seemed almost unchanged, yet subtly different. Shadows stretched longer under the morning sun. Dust and fragments glimmered faintly with an inner light, and the faint breeze carried hints of the metallic temps that had been present the day before. It was as if the earth itself remembered, whispering secrets in the way the wind stirred the grass, in the way the sunlight caught the edges of broken walls. The girls paused, tracing the faint impressions in the soil with soft fingertips, marveling at the precision, the delicacy, the undeniable proof that something had been here and was no ordinary part of their world. Even the town seemed to respond to these quiet signs. Birds moved cautiously through the sky, their songs hesitant and melodic, carrying the rhythm of something unseen. Dogs padded softly along cobblestone streets, ears twitching at sounds too subtle for human perception. And behind closed doors, adults whispered in hushed tones, recounting fleeting impressions, stories half-remembered and carefully framed, unsure of what was real and what was the imagination of minds stretched by wonder. Carlos de Souza returned once more to the ridge overlooking the fields. From this vantage, the town spread beneath him like a tapestry, a quiet canvas of rooftops, gardens, and dusty roads. He studied the lot where fragments glimmered faintly in the morning sun, his mind circling the image of the cylindrical craft that had fallen from the sky. The fragments themselves seemed to hold memories, vibrating subtly beneath his fingertips as he imagined the journey they had taken, the worlds they had touched before arriving in this quiet corner of Brazil. Across the town, Yuriko and Oralina moved among the fields, their work slow and deliberate. The air was filled with the scent of tilled earth and faint metallic residue, a subtle reminder of the night's extraordinary events. Their conversations were measured, thoughtful, as they shared memories of lights drifting in the sky, of shadows that lingered longer than they should, of impressions left behind in the soil. There was no need for panic. An undeniable awareness threaded itself through their hearts. Life, as they had known it, had been quietly transformed. Signs of the extraordinary rippled outward. Windows caught glints of movement too subtle to explain, lights flickering in ways that could not be attributed to wind or the mundane passing of the day. Faint hums vibrated through the air, imperceptible yet insistent, threading their way into the edges of perception. Even in places untouched by direct experience, the town's awareness grew, delicate yet persistent, like seedlings pushing through soil after a long winter. Whispers carried through homes and gardens, stories told quietly in the spaces between tasks. "Did you see it last night?" one voice would murmur, soft and hesitant. It moved differently, almost like it was watching. Another would reply, careful to speak only two trusted ears. Each whisper layered upon the next, forming a quiet network of understanding and curiosity that threaded through Varginha. Like invisible light, the extraordinary was no longer a fleeting incident. It was becoming a part of the town's consciousness. By midday, more subtle signs began to appear. Children playing in open fields reported seeing shadows move where none should be, fleeting glimpses of shapes too small to name but too deliberate to dismiss. Windows in homes caught reflections that flickered and shifted even when no one passed. Dogs refused to enter certain areas, lingering near fences, noses lifted to scents only they could perceive. Even the wind seemed to carry a faint, deliberate note, a quiet awareness of something beyond the ordinary rhythms of life. In the lot, the creature remained elusive, but present. Small movements hinted at awareness, at learning, at the quiet study of a world it did not fully understand. Its crimson eyes reflected sunlight and shadow alike, carrying a depth that spoke of memory, displacement, and curiosity. Its trembling persisted, delicate yet deliberate, a subtle heartbeat of life that seemed to resonate with the very earth beneath its feet. For those who glimpsed it, even from a distance, the impression was undeniable. Something extraordinary lingered here, fragile and alive, threading itself softly into the fabric of the town. As evening approached, shadows lengthened, soft and fluid, weaving along streets, rooftops, and fields. The town's awareness sharpened with the lowering light, every subtle movement amplified by imagination and intuition. Windows reflected the golden glow of sunset, and the air carried the faint scent of earth and metallic residue mingling with the cooling warmth. People paused in doorways, leaning slightly forward as if listening for sounds too quiet to name, for signs too delicate to identify, for the faintest whisper of the impossible brushing against their lives. Carlos returned to the ridge for one last glance as the sun sank behind distant hills. The fragments of metal in the lot glimmered faintly in the waning light, delicate traces of a world that had touched theirs only briefly yet left an indelible mark. He could almost feel the memory of the craft in the soil, the gentle pulse of presence lingering beneath the surface. Somewhere in the shadows, the creature observed, learning, waiting, its small body trembling with the quiet awareness of the town's gaze. Night fell slowly over Varginha, draping rooftops, streets, and fields in deep, calming blue. Stars began to pierce the sky with delicate pinpricks of light, distant and patient, as if watching and waiting alongside the town. The lot, dusted with fragments and memories, glimmered faintly in the moonlight. Somewhere hidden in shadows, the creature remained alive, aware, and quietly patient. It trembled not with fear, but with anticipation, as though sensing the growing curiosity of those who had glimpsed it, those who would carry its story in dreams, whispers, and quiet memories. In the quiet of the night, the town breathed gently, wrapped in the soft rhythm of awareness. Families slept fitfully. Children murmured names of shapes seen only in dreams, and adults dreamed of lights, shadows, and impossible possibilities. The extraordinary lingered quietly, threading itself into the lives of Varginha's residents with the gentle insistence of a slow tide reshaping familiar shores. Even in the stillest hours, when rooftops were silent, streets empty, and fields motionless, the town's awareness persisted. Something extraordinary had arrived, something fragile, something alive, and its presence resonated softly in the spaces between life's ordinary rhythms. Varginha had been touched, forever shifted, by whispers of the impossible, delicate, yet persistent, waiting for those willing to see, to feel, to wonder. And in the distance, the faint shimmer of metal fragments and the trembling movement of small limbs reminded the town, softly yet insistently, that the extraordinary was not Ganit, was only waiting. And as dawn approached once more, the town would begin to notice patterns, small signs threading together, as if the extraordinary were quietly teaching them to look closer. Chapter 7. Patterns in the Sky. The morning arrived quietly, albeit Varginha, soft light spilling over rooftops, fields, and winding streets. The town moved slowly, as if still feeling the residue of the extraordinary nights that had unfolded. A gentle breeze carried the familiar scents of earth, dust, and distant flowers. Yet underneath it, something subtle lingered, a whisper in the air, a presence that had become part of the rhythm of life. People went about their routines, but the ordinary now coexisted with a delicate awareness of the extraordinary. From the ridge, Carlos de Souza watched the horizon, eyes tracing the slow, rhythmic movement of clouds across the pale blue sky. It was ordinary, serene, yet impossible to ignore. Something about the air felt charged, a subtle vibration threading across the town, teasing the edges of perception. It was as if the sky itself carried a language, patterns woven invisibly into the light, shapes that could only be felt rather than seen. It felt, drawn, pulled by curiosity and instinct, toward the horizon where fragments from the craft had fallen. The lot remained quiet, dusted with fragments of metal that shimmered faintly in the morning light. The impressions in the earth, the delicate three-toed prints, had faded slightly with the morning breeze, yet their memory lingered. It was as if the earth itself remembered, whispering secrets through the subtle movement of dust, the gentle bending of grass, and the faint glimmer of fragments. The creature's presence was hidden, yet tangible. Its awareness threaded softly through the morning air, delicate as a tremor in the soil. Across the town, patterns began to emerge in subtle ways. Children playing in open fields noticed shapes in the clouds, slow, deliberate formations that seemed too symmetrical to be random. Birds moved in unusual arcs across the sky, their flight patterns weaving gentle loops and spirals that felt almost intentional. Even the sunlight seemed to dance differently, casting fleeting shadows that shifted in ways no one could immediately explain. Those with eyes attuned to the extraordinary noticed these signs and felt the faint pull of curiosity in their chests, gentle yet insistent. Lilian, Valqueria, and Katia returned to the lot, moving cautiously, careful not to disturb the delicate imprint of the morning. Their conversation was quiet, almost whispered, as they shared observations and memories. The crimson eyes, the trembling limbs, the faint metallic temps in the aural seemed to connect with the patterns they now noticed above and around them. The extraordinary was no longer confined to one moment. It was threading itself through the town, in sky, soil, and shadow alike. Carlos, observing from his perch, noticed the subtle symmetry in the clouds. Shapes formed and dissolved, soft arcs that mirrored the movement of the craft he had glimpsed days before. He wondered, silently, if the sky itself was attempting to communicate, weaving messages in forms too delicate for ordinary eyes to catch. He felt a shiver of awe, that same quiet mixture of fear and fascination he had felt the first time he saw the metallic craft descend. The patterns in the sky were deliberate, gentle, and hypnotic, echoing the subtle rhythm of the being that had touched their town. Even the adults felt the presence of these patterns. Yuriko and Aurelina paused in their work, noticing arcs in the clouds that seemed too precise to be random. Shadows shifted subtly in the garden, glinting off leaves and stones, in ways that hinted at movement beyond their perception. Conversations took on a hushed, almost reverent tone as neighbors exchanged observations, each whisper layered with curiosity and wonder. Something extraordinary was threading itself through Varginha, small but persistent, quiet but undeniable. The afternoon brought even more signs. A flock of birds passed overhead in formations, too precise to be accidental, gliding in arcs that seemed to mirror the shape of the craft that had fallen. Children noticed small, shimmering lights dancing at the edges of their vision, vanishing when looked at directly, leaving only a faint sense of warmth and presence. Windows reflected these lights subtly, catching glimmers that shifted with the movement of the sun. The town, slowly, began to understand that the extraordinary was not isolated, was everywhere, waiting for those willing to notice. In the lot, the creature observed these patterns with quiet awareness. Its crimson eyes tracked the arcs of the clouds, the loops of birds in flight, the glimmers of light on fragments of metal. Its small body trembled slightly, not with fear, but with the intensity of curiosity. It seemed to understand the connections between sky, earth, and observer, sensing the subtle awareness of the humans who were beginning to notice, beginning to see. Its presence was gentle, deliberate, and almost invisible. Yet the patterns it traced were undeniable to those with eyes open to wonder. The evening brought a deepening sense of anticipation. Shadows stretched across the town, soft and fluid, blending with the twilight. The sky glimmered with subtle arcs and spirals of light, delicate patterns that seemed almost intentional. Windows reflected faint glimmers. Streets carried the scent of earth and dust, mingled with something faintly metallic, and the lot remained quiet, holding the memory of presence and movement. The town's attention, though unspoken, was drawn upward and outward, as if aware that the extraordinary was threading itself into every corner of their perception. Carlos returned once more to the ridge, tracing the subtle arcs in the clouds with his eyes. The patterns shifted and flowed, delicate and hypnotic, a language of light and movement that whispered of worlds beyond his understanding. He felt a quiet connection to the creature below, a sense that it was observing as much as he was, that the threads of awareness were linking them in subtle, almost imperceptible ways. The town was slowly awakening to this delicate network of signs, each one a whisper of the extraordinary that lingered, patient and deliberate, across sky and land. Night arrived, soft and calm, enveloping Varginha in deep blue. Stars began to pierce the darkness, distant and patient, mirroring the gentle patterns that had moved through the town during the day. The lot glimmered faintly, fragments of metal catching the light like echoes of the craft that had fallen. Somewhere hidden in the shadows, the creature remained, trembling slightly, its eyes reflecting both the patterns in the sky and the subtle awareness of the town. The extraordinary was not gonit, was present, quiet, delicate, and alive. Families slept with dreams colored by arcs of light and soft loops in the sky. Children murmuring names for shapes they barely understood. Adults dreamed, too, of light, motion, and impossible connections threading through the world, even in the stillest hours. The town felt the presence of the extraordinary quiet pulse running beneath the surface of life, subtle yet persistent, and in the lot, the creature's gaze swept across the shadows, the fragments, the patterns of light, absorbing, learning, and patiently waiting. Its presence was small, fragile, and deliberate, yet undeniable, like the faint hum of a distant star carried on the wind. Varginha had been touched, its ordinary rhythm altered by the extraordinary, and the threads of wonder and curiosity would continue to weave themselves into the town, subtle, persistent, and impossible to ignore. And as dawn approached, new patterns would emerge, hints of connection that the town had yet to understand, softly guiding them toward discovery. Chapter 8. Echoes in the Fields. The early morning mist settled over Varginha like a delicate veil, softening the edges of fields, fences, and distant rooftops. The town moved slowly, almost cautiously, as if still adjusting to the quiet rhythm left behind by the extraordinary days and nights that had passed. The ordinary routines of life persisted. Children wandered through gardens. Farmers tended crops, and the soft hum of daily labor filled the air, but everything carried a subtle undertone of awareness. Something lingered in the fields, soft yet insistent, and the town had begun to sense it, even if no one could fully name it. Carlos de Souza rose early, following the pull that had drawn him to the ridge day after day. The wind whispered gently against his skin as he made his way across the dusty roads, carrying faint scents of earth, dew, and a metallic temps that seemed to linger in the air like memory. From the ridge, he could see the lot where the creature had first been glimpsed, now bathed in the soft gold of morning. Dust motes danced lightly in the sunlight, and fragments of metals scattered across the earth glimmered faintly, catching the light as if alive with memory. As he scanned the fields, Carlos noticed subtle changes. Footprints appeared where none had been before. Delicate, precise impressions in the damp soil that suggested small limbs moving carefully, leaving behind traces of presence. The earth seemed to hum with a quiet vibration, almost imperceptible, that spoke of something alive, observing, learning. These signs were faint and fleeting, yet persistent, echoing through the fields and threading themselves into the town's perception. Lilian, Valkyria, and Katea made their way toward the outskirts of town, drawn by a mixture of curiosity and the memory of crimson eyes that had haunted their thoughts. Their footsteps were soft, careful, as if they were stepping into a world that existed just beyond ordinary understanding. The fields stretched wide before them, green and golden in the morning light, shadows stretching long across the furrows and grasses, and within those shadows, subtle hints of presence awaited, movements so slight they could be mistaken for wind, shapes so delicate they could vanish if observed too directly. The creature had not moved far. It lingered at the edges of the fields, careful and deliberate, small and fragile. Its crimson eyes followed the girl's movements, wide and luminous, absorbing every detail of their presence and the patterns of light, wind, and dust around them. Its body trembled gently, a rhythm of life delicate yet insistent, resonating faintly with the very earth beneath it. Every step it took was measured, subtle, almost ceremonial, leaving behind impressions that hinted at connection without revealing the full story. Carlos observed from a distance, heart quiet with awe. He could see the faint arcs of movement in the air above the fields, the subtle shimmer of dust disturbed by the small presence below. Every fragment of metal in the lot seemed to pulse faintly in response, catching the light, reminding him of the craft that had fallen and the extraordinary being it had carried. The town, he realized, was no longer merely a backdrop. It had become part of the narrative itself, a participant in a story that moved gently between the ordinary and the impossible. Eurico and Noralina, tending their crops nearby, paused to observe patterns in the fields, small disturbances in the soil, fleeting shadows shifting in ways that did not align with wind or sunlight, drew their attention. They did not speak immediately, instead exchanging subtle glances that acknowledged the strangeness of what they observed. There was a rhythm here, a quiet echo of presence that threaded through the grass and soil, delicate and persistent, waiting to be noticed by those with patience to see. Children, curious and unafraid, wandered into the edges of the fields, noticing shimmering movements at the periphery of their vision. Lights flickered softly among the grasses, fleeting glimpses that vanished when looked at directly, leaving only a faint warmth and the sense of being observed. Whispers passed among them, soft and tentative. "Did you see that? It moved. Over there, near the trees." Their voices carried through the fields, blending with the gentle rustling of leaves, the hum of distant insects, and the faint, persistent vibration of the extraordinary. As the day progressed, the town began to recognize patterns emerging in the most ordinary of places. The creature's presence left subtle signs, footprints, impressions in the soil. The faint glimmer of metallic fragments disturbed from their resting places. Even the wind seemed to carry intention, stirring grasses in gentle waves that mirrored the arcs of clouds above or the movement of birds across the sky. Every small occurrence was a whisper, a thread connecting the town to something larger, something alive, something quietly extraordinary. The girls moved cautiously through the fields, tracing the faint impressions in the soil with soft fingertips. The earth seemed to respond, subtle vibrations traveling up through their hands and feet, almost like a gentle heartbeat. They noticed tiny patterns, three-toed prints that led to small clearings, subtle disturbances in the dust where the creature had paused, and delicate glimmers in the sunlight where fragments had caught the morning rays. Every detail seemed deliberate, a language of presence that they were only beginning to understand. Carlos remained on the ridge, watching the interplay between light, shadow, and movement. He could see the creature's tremors reflected faintly in the sway of grass, the shift of dust, and the quiet rhythm of the air. Its presence was gentle, deliberate, and unobtrusive, yet the echoes it left were undeniable. Each sign was a message, a fragment of understanding, threading softly into the awareness of the town and those who had witnessed it. Evening approached, painting the fields in warm gold and deepening shadows. The extraordinary continued to reveal itself subtly, guiding the town's perception without forcing recognition. Every leaf that trembled, every shadow that shifted, every fragment that glimmered was a gentle nudge, encouraging attention, curiosity, and wonder. The pattern was never aggressive, never threatening. It was an invitation, quiet and deliberate, asking the town to observe, to connect, and to acknowledge the presence that lingered among them. The creature, now partially hidden among the long grasses, trembled gently under the fading light. Its crimson eyes reflected the sunset, capturing every subtle movement, every sound, every flicker of awareness that traveled through the fields. Its body, small and fragile, resonated softly with the rhythm of the earth beneath it, a quiet pulse of life that connected the extraordinary to the ordinary. Each motion was deliberate, each tremor a whisper, each glance a message of curiosity and awareness. Carlos descended toward the fields as the sun dipped below the horizon, careful to remain silent, careful to observe without disturbing the delicate balance of presence. The lot glimmered faintly behind him, fragments of metal catching the last rays of sunlight, while the impressions in the soil told a quiet story. The extraordinary threaded itself through the town, through the fields, and into the awareness of those who were willing to notice. It was a presence small yet persistent, subtle yet undeniable, fragile yet alive. Night settled gently over Varginha, draping the town and its surrounding fields in deep blue. Stars began to pierce the sky with soft, patient light, mirroring the delicate tremors and subtle patterns left across the fields. The creature remained, small and vigilant, its crimson eyes reflecting moonlight and the quiet awareness of the town. It had become a part of the world it had touched, threading softly through shadows, dust, and patterns in the sky, leaving tracers that could be seen, felt, and sensed by those who paused to observe. The town slept quietly, yet the rhythm of the extraordinary persisted. Children dreamed of light flickering at the edges of vision, of shadows dancing among the fields, of small tremors in the soil that carried meaning beyond words. Adults dreamed, too, of subtle signs, of presence, of gentle patterns, threading themselves into the ordinary rhythm of life. And in the lot, among dust and fragments, the creature remained alive, aware, patient, and quietly teaching the town to notice, to perceive, to wonder. Varginha had become a place of quiet observation, a town attuned to subtle signs, 2 whispers carried on the wind, 2 tremors in the soil, and 2 patterns in the sky. The extraordinary had arrived, small and deliberate, leaving echoes in the fields, messages in the shadows, and traces in the hearts of those who witnessed. And as the night deepened, the awareness of the town and the presence of the creature intertwined, softly, irreversibly, patiently awaiting the next ripple of understanding. And as dawn approached, faint glimmers would appear again, delicate reminders that the extraordinary was never far, quietly echoing through the fields. Chapter 9. The Quiet Watchers. Night had fallen softly over Varginha, settling like a gentle, protective blanket over rooftops, fields, and the narrow winding streets. The town, accustomed to the rhythm of ordinary life, now moved with a new awareness, a careful attentiveness to what the night might hold. Even the air seemed different, quieter, heavier with possibility, carrying faint hints of metallic temps, and the earthy fragrance of the fields beyond. It was as if the town itself had become alert, listening for a presence it could not fully see, yet felt in every shadow and every movement. Carlos de Souza wandered once more, toward the ridge overlooking the outskirts of town. Moonlight stretched across the fields, painting the landscape in pale silver and deepening shadows. He noticed faint impressions in the soil, the subtle glimmer of metal fragments catching the light, and, most of all, a quiet awareness that seemed to ripple through the night. The extraordinary had left its mark, not just in physical traces, but in something more elusive, a sense that they were being observed, gently, patiently, almost reverently. Liliane, Valkyria, and Katia made their way quietly through the town, drawn by the same invisible thread that guided Carlos. Their steps were soft on cobblestones and dirt paths, ears tuned to every sound, the rustle of leaves, the distant hoot of an owl, the faint hum that occasionally vibrated in the air. They were careful not to disturb the delicate balance of presence, yet their curiosity pulled them forward, weaving them into the subtle rhythm that had begun to define Varginha. In the lot, the creature remained hidden, small and deliberate, its crimson eyes glowing faintly under the silver gaze of the moon. It trembled lightly, not with fear but with awareness, following the movements of the humans from a careful distance. Every subtle motion, every soft sound, every flicker of light across the fields was observed, catalogued, understood. Its presence was quiet, almost invisible, yet it carried an unmistakable weight, a sense of knowing, of perception, of consciousness that stretched beyond the ordinary senses of those who lived in the town. Carlos noticed it first in the movement of the shadows. There was a rhythm in the fields that didn't align with the wind, a pattern in the way the dust shifted that seemed deliberate. He froze in place, sensing a presence that was neither threatening nor urgent, but patient and intelligent. The ordinary elements, the sway of grass, the shimmer of fragments, the distant reflections on windows seemed to pulse in response to an unseen awareness. And he realized, in a quiet, almost disbelieving moment, that they were not alone. They had never truly been alone. Across the town, Yuriko and Orlina paused in their evening chores, noticing subtle shifts in the wind, delicate patterns in the shadows, and the faint glimmer of movement at the edges of perception. Dogs barked softly, hesitant and uncertain, sniffing at invisible trails. The residents of Varginha began to understand that the extraordinary presence was not confined to one place. It threaded itself across the town, weaving through streets, rooftops, and fields with a quiet, deliberate awareness. Children, too, began to notice. Small, quiet glimmers appeared in the corners of their vision, shapes that seemed to shift when observed directly, lights that flickered with impossible timing. They whispered to one another, hesitant yet thrilled, sharing the soft sense that they were being watched, not in a way that frightened them, but in a way that made the ordinary world feel alive with curiosity. The extraordinaire had become a part of their daily rhythm, threading through the fields, the streets, and their dreams. In the lot, the creature's tremors grew subtle but purposeful, It moved delicately through the long grass, observing the town's patterns, studying the humans who wandered nearby, and leaving traces behind footprints, faint shifts in dust, small disturbances in fragments of metal. These signs were deliberate, gentle, and hypnotic, a quiet communication that only those attuned could perceive. The town had begun to learn the language of presence, the soft rhythm of observation, the delicate pulse of awareness that threaded through every corner of Varginha. Carlos descended into the lot, careful not to disturb the fragile equilibrium. He observed the faint prints, the tremor in the grass, the subtle glimmer of light on the fragments. It was a language without words, a quiet, patient communication that stretched across the distance between human and extraordinary. And in that moment, he felt a connection not just to the creature, but to the entire town, to the rhythm of observation, to the invisible network of awareness that the extraordinary had begun to weave. Liliane, Valkyria, and Katia approached from a separate path, drawn by curiosity and an unspoken intuition. They paused at the edge of the lot, noticing the same signs. Footprints, shifts in dust, the subtle glimmer of metal fragments, and the faint tremor in the long grasses. They did not speak, only moved slowly and quietly, attuned to the rhythm of presence that seemed to hum in the air. The creature's eyes followed them, observing, learning, responding with the gentle tremor of awareness, the quiet pulse of life threading subtly through the night. The town itself seemed to respond to the presence. Streetlights flickered with a soft, almost deliberate rhythm. Shadows shifted gently along the walls and rooftops. Windows reflected faint glimmers of light, traces of motion, and arcs of movement that could not be explained by wind or ordinary life. Even the air carried subtle vibrations, a gentle pulse that threaded through the town, binding observation and presence in a quiet, hypnotic rhythm. As the night deepened, patterns became more pronounced. Clouds moved slowly across the sky, tracing gentle arcs that mirrored movements in the fields. Birds shifted in quiet, deliberate formations gliding in spirals and curves that seemed almost intentional. The extraordinary presence was everywhere, subtle but undeniable, guiding attention, curiosity, and perception. Varginha had become a place of quiet awareness, a town attuned to the delicate threads of observation that connected human and unknown life alike. The creature trembled gently, aware of the humans observing, aware of the town's growing consciousness. Its crimson eyes reflected moonlight, capturing every flicker of motion, every subtle shift in wind and shadow, every heartbeat of curiosity that pulsed softly through the town. It did not move aggressively, did not seek to frighten, but instead observed, learned, and threaded its presence into the world with a patient, deliberate rhythm. Carlos, the girls, and the few others who wandered into the lot that night felt it unmistakably. The extraordinary was intelligent, aware, and patient. Its observation was not hostile but deliberate, teaching them through presence, traces, and subtle interaction. They realized that Varginha had become a network of quiet watchers, human and extraordinary alike, connected through faint tremors, subtle patterns, and the silent pulse of life, threading through fields, streets, and rooftops. Night carried on gently, wrapping the town in deep blue calm. The extraordinary lingered, delicate and patient, leaving echoes in dust, glimmers in fragments, tremors in grass, and subtle signs in the sky. The town had become attuned, quietly learning to observe, to perceive, and to wonder. And in the stillest moments, when rooftops were silent and fields motionless, the awareness of the quiet watchers threaded softly through every corner of Varginha, an invisible, gentle presence that bound ordinary life to the extraordinary. The residents slept with dreams illuminated by arcs of light, subtle patterns, and the faint pulse of observation. Children murmured in their sleep, tracing shapes too delicate for words, feeling the presence of life that was small yet persistent. Adults dreamt, too, of patterns in clouds, arcs of motion across the fields, and faint tremors that carried messages beyond language. The town had learned the rhythm of awareness, and the extraordinary presence had become a part of it. Patient, deliberate, and impossible to ignore. In the lot, the creature remained small, fragile, yet profoundly aware. Its tremors, its observation, and its presence connected with the humans who wandered near, creating a delicate network of consciousness that linked town and extraordinary life. The night carried its message quietly, threading through shadows, dust, and glimmers of light, gentle, patient teaching that would guide Varginha toward deeper understanding in the days to come. And with the coming dawn, the town would begin to sense not only presence, but intention, as the quiet watchers revealed the first hints of communication. Chapter 10: Whispers in the Wind. The morning arrived softly over Varginha, with the sun spilling pale gold across rooftops, streets, and distant fields. There was a stillness in the air, a quiet weight that carried with it the memory of nights filled with subtle signs, tremors, and patterns left by a presence that had become almost imperceptibly intertwined with the town. People moved through their routines, but now each motion carried a faint awareness, as if even the simplest act, watering a garden, opening a window, or stepping onto a porch, was an opportunity to feel the extraordinary. Carlos de Souza walked toward the ridge once more, drawn by the pull of curiosity and the memory of the falling craft. He moved slowly, feeling the wind against his face, inhaling the faint metallic temps that lingered in the air, subtle and elusive. The fields spread out beneath him, golden with the rising sun, dust swirling softly along worn paths. Asewachet. He noticed small shifts in the grasses that could not be attributed to the breeze. They bent and curved in subtle, deliberate arcs, as if responding to a presence that existed beyond ordinary perception. At the lot, Lilian, Valkyria, and Katia arrived, careful not to disturb the delicate equilibrium. They paused, scanning the subtle signs, footprints in soft soil, glimmers on fragments of metal, and faint tremors across the ground. Their eyes met in silent understanding. Something was communicating, not with words, but with intention threaded into the very environment. They felt it in the air, in the sway of dust and grass, and in the gentle arcs traced by the sunlight. The extraordinary was reaching out in ways delicate and subtle, teaching them to perceive beyond the ordinary. The creature, small and trembling, lingered at the edge of the lot. Its crimson eyes followed their movement, luminous and aware, reflecting both curiosity and the faintest glimmer of recognition. Each motion was deliberate, each tremor a soft whisper, every glance a quiet question. It did not approach aggressively, nor did it retreat in fear. Instead, it threaded itself into the environment, leaving delicate signs that beckoned observation arcs in dust, patterns in grass, subtle shifts in fragments of metal. Carlos crouched near one of the small metallic shards, noticing a faint warmth that pulsed with almost imperceptible rhythm. It was as if the fragments themselves had absorbed some memory of the craft, of the presence, of the creature that had fallen into their world. He reached out, careful not to disturb it, feeling the vibration of awareness beneath his fingertips. A faint hum tickled the edges of perception. A whisper carried on the wind that seemed to ask, gently, "Do you see? Do you understand?" Across the town, residents began to notice more subtle signs. A window that caught the first light of day reflected not only the rising sun but also a faint glimmer of movement at its edges. Shadows shifted softly in ways that did not align with the position of trees or rooftops. Leaves trembled on branches in delicate arcs, glimmering faintly as though responding to something unseen. Dogs paused mid-step, ears tilted, noses lifted to scents that could not be named. Even the hum of distant insects seemed synchronized with something beyond ordinary comprehension. Lilian traced a path through the dust and grass, following the creature's subtle traces. Each footprint, each tremor, each faint shimmer in the light felt deliberate, as though the being had left a map of intention rather than direction. The girls moved slowly, their steps quiet, attuned to the language of presence that pulsed softly beneath the surface of the town. They began to sense not just observation, but intention and almost conscious guidance woven into every ripple, shimmer, and tremor. Carlos noticed it too, in the subtle arcs of the wind as it moved through the fields. Small eddies carried faint, metallic whispers that tickled the ears, almost musical in their rhythm. They were soft, elusive, and hypnotic, impossible to grasp fully yet undeniable in their presence. He felt the pulse of awareness threading through everything, the soil beneath his feet, the swaying grasses, the shimmering fragments of metal, the shadows that danced faintly across the lot. The extraordinary had left not only traces, but a network of subtle communication, waiting for perception, waiting for understanding. Even the children of Varginha began to notice these soft interactions. Tiny glimmers danced at the edges of their vision, lights that moved with gentle precision, disappearing when looked at directly but leaving a lingering warmth in the air. They whispered to one another, sharing discoveries with wide eyes and quiet giggles. "Did you see that? It moved. Look, it's following us." Their voices carried the excitement of recognition, tempered by awe, as they became part of the quiet, patient rhythm that bound the town to the extraordinary presence. The creature observed quietly from the edge of the lot. Its tremors became slightly more deliberate, subtle arcs in the grass and soil forming patterns that resonated with the humans nearby. It shifted its weight carefully, leaving traces that spoke in a language of presence, not sound or words. Carlos, the girls, and a few other observant residents began to understand the rhythm, a delicate, hypnotic interaction threaded through space and time. The extraordinary was teaching them to perceive with more than just their eyes, to listen with more than just their ears, to feel with more than just their hands. As evening approached, the air grew warmer and still, carrying faint metallic scents and the earthy perfume of tilled soil. Shadows stretched long, softening the edges of streets, rooftops, and fields. The lot glimmered faintly under the fading sun, fragments of metal catching the last rays and reflecting them in gentle, hypnotic pulses. The creature's crimson eyes followed every movement, observing, learning, and threading a quiet dialogue of intention through the night. Carlos descended toward the lot, moving slowly and deliberately. Each step felt significant, each breath drawn in sync with the rhythm of presence that pulsed faintly through the air. He traced arcs in the dust, noticing subtle shifts where the creature had passed. The tremor beneath his fingertips carried meaning, a quiet, patient invitation to perceive, to understand, to connect. The extraordinary was no longer merely observed. It was interacting, guiding, and communicating in ways too delicate for ordinary comprehension. The girls followed, silent and attentive, their senses attuned to every whisper in the wind, every shimmer of light, every subtle movement in the dust. The creature's presence threaded around them, weaving a gentle network of awareness that connected human and extraordinary life. Its tremors and glimmers were deliberate, hypnotic, and soft, inviting perception rather than demanding it. The town had become a place of subtle interaction, a living conversation between the ordinary and the extraordinary, threaded delicately through space, light, and sound. Night deepened over Varginha. The sky painted in deep, hypnotic blue. Stars appeared, distant and patient, echoing the rhythm of interaction that had woven itself across the town. Shadows shifted with deliberate subtlety, dusk glimmered faintly, and fragments of metal reflected the pale light with quiet intensity. The creature remained at the edge of the lot, observing, trembling, leaving deliberate traces, and interacting softly with the humans who moved carefully among its signs. In their sleep, residents dreamed of soft glimmers, arcs of light patterns traced in the soil, and faint whispers in the wind. Children murmured names for shapes they barely understood, feeling the presence of the extraordinary in every flicker of vision. Adults dreamt of subtle signs, of awareness, and of quiet guidance threading through the world. The town had become attuned to interaction, aware of intention, and patient in the quiet observation of the extraordinary. And in the lot, the creature's crimson eyes reflected moonlight in the soft pulse of the town's awareness. Its small body trembled with deliberate rhythm, leaving traces that carried meaning beyond words. Every footprint, every shimmer, every tremor was an echo of intention, a whisper in the wind that the town could perceive if they listened closely enough. The extraordinary was no longer distant. It had become a quiet, patient presence, gently interacting, softly teaching, and threading itself through the lives of all who dwelt in Varginha. And as dawn approached, the whispers in the wind would grow clearer, hinting at secrets just beyond understanding, inviting the town to follow their delicate guidance. Chapter 11. The Hidden Trail. Dawn settled gently over Varginha, painting rooftops, fields, and streets in soft shades of gold and rose. The town stirred slowly, as if reluctant to rise, still feeling the subtle resonance of the nights before, the quiet presence that threaded itself through every shadow and glimmer. Even the air seemed infused with a delicate vibration, carrying a faint metallic scent and the earthy perfume of damp soil. It was a rhythm that was at once familiar and strange, one that humans could sense but not fully comprehend. Carlos de Sousa moved carefully toward the ridge, drawn by the same thread of curiosity that had guided him for days. His eyes traced the horizon, searching for subtle movements, faint glimmers of light, and arcs in the wind that might carry meaning. The fields below swayed in gentle waves, each blade of grass catching the first rays of sunlight. Something had changed. The impressions, the traces, the tremors in the dust, they had begun to form a pattern. A hidden trail that could only be understood by those patient enough to follow it. Liliane, Valkyria, and Katia made their way toward the lot. Footsteps soft and deliberate, ears attuned to every whisper in the wind. They noticed the faint signs immediately. Delicate footprints in the soil, arcs in the dust, and shimmering fragments of metal arranged in ways that seemed intentional rather than random. There was a rhythm here, subtle but unmistakable, as if the extraordinary presence had begun to leave a path, one that was meant to be noticed and followed, carefully and attentively. The creature lingered near the edge of the lot, trembling softly, crimson eyes luminous in the morning light. It observed the humans with quiet awareness, its small body shifting gently with the rhythm of its own attention. Every movement it made left deliberate traces, impressions in the soil, small arcs of dust, slight disturbances and fragments of metal that caught the sunlight and reflected tiny glimmers. It was creating a map without words, a hidden trail that could be read only by those willing to see, willing to slow down and pay attention. Carlos knelt near one of the glimmering fragments, lifting it carefully and noticing the faint warmth that pulsed through his fingertips. The metal seemed almost alive, responsive to touch, humming faintly like a soft echo of the presence that had fallen from the sky. He traced arcs in the dust, noticing how the small disturbances connected, forming a subtle, winding path. It was a trail designed not to be obvious, but to guide those who were attuned, those who had learned to perceive the extraordinary threads woven into the ordinary world. The girls followed quietly, their eyes scanning for patterns in the soil, the tremor of grass, the glimmer of fragments. Each trace seemed to pull them forward gently, guiding them along a path that was not imposed, but suggested. Footprints led to small clearings. Arcs of dust pointed toward distant trees, and subtle glimmers caught in sunlight formed a rhythm of light that echoed the movement of the creature. It was a trail that demanded attention, patience, and quiet observation, and the girls felt a thrill of connection as they began to understand its meaning. Across the town, the ordinary continued, yet infused with subtle signs. Birds shifted in delicate formations above, gliding in arcs and spirals that mirrored the patterns traced on the ground. Shadows moved with gentle intent, bending around corners and rooftops as if acknowledging something unseen. Even the breeze seemed to carry deliberate pulses, rustling through the leaves in a way that suggested rhythm, message, and guidance. Varginha was becoming a town of quiet observers, learning to read the language of the extraordinary. Carlos noticed another faint pattern in the soil, a series of small three-toed impressions that led from the lot into a narrow path between the fields. They were spaced deliberately, the rhythm precise, as though guiding those who were attentive toward something significant. He traced them slowly with his fingertips, feeling a pulse beneath the earth, a soft vibration that seemed almost like breath. Each mark carried meaning. Each tremor was a whisper. Follow. Observe. Understand. The girls reached a small clearing, noticing subtle signs that indicated they were on the right path. Small disturbances in the dust created arcs of motion. Fragments of metal glimmered in the sunlight at precise intervals, and the tremor of the grass beneath their feet formed a gentle rhythm. They realized that the creature was guiding them, leading them along a hidden trail that was both delicate and hypnotic. A sequence of signs meant to be followed with care. As they moved deeper into the fields, the town's rhythm seemed to echo the trail. Windows reflected faint glimmers of movement. Shadows shifted along walls, and the air carried subtle vibrations that guided footsteps and curiosity. The extraordinary presence was no longer hidden. It was deliberate, creating a network of subtle communication that connected the creature to those willing to follow. Every step along the trail was a lesson in observation, a gentle invitation to perceive beyond the ordinary, to see intention threaded into every corner of the world. The creature trembled gently as it watched, following the humans with soft, deliberate movements. Its crimson eyes reflected arcs of sunlight, the sway of grass, and the shimmer of fragments. It moved slowly, carefully, leaving behind traces that formed the hidden trail, each sign precise, hypnotic, and infused with meaning. The trail was not a test, nor a trap. It was a guide. A delicate language of presence designed to awaken awareness and curiosity. Carlos traced the path further, noticing patterns in shadows and subtle shifts in light that he had not seen before. Dust lifted slightly with each step, arcs forming like invisible lines connecting points across the field. Every glimmer of metal, every subtle tremor, every impression in the soil seemed synchronized, creating a rhythm that could be felt in the chest as much as seen with the eyes. The town had become part of the extraordinary network, woven into the trail through perception, attention, and patient observation. The girls moved carefully, feeling the rhythm of the hidden trail in their steps, in the tremor beneath their feet, and in the glimmers of light that danced at the edge of their vision. The creature's presence was gentle but persistent, guiding them not with force, but with subtlety, creating a path that was as much about perception and awareness as it was about location. It was teaching them the language of attention, the art of noticing, and the delicate rhythm of interaction between the ordinary and the extraordinary. As the sun rose higher, warming the fields, the trail became clearer yet remained hypnotically delicate. Footprints, arcs in dust, subtle tremors in grass, and the glimmer of fragments formed a winding path that guided the girls and Carlos through the golden fields. The air carried faint whispers, a soft hum of awareness that threaded through every step, every glance, every motion. It was a quiet conversation without words, a gentle dialogue of presence and perception. By afternoon, they reached a small grove at the far edge of the fields, where the creature had paused deliberately. Here, the traces became concentrated. Arcs in dust formed delicate spirals. Footprints encircled small clearings, and fragments of metal glimmered in hypnotic patterns. It was as if the creature had prepared this place for observation, for understanding, for a moment of connection that went beyond simple awareness. The hidden trail had led them here, through rhythm, intention, and patient guidance. Carlos knelt to observe the glimmers in the sunlight, tracing patterns with his fingertips and feeling the subtle vibration beneath the earth. The girls circled the clearing, noticing arcs in dust, tremors in the grass, and small disturbances in fragments. They understood, without needing explanation, that the creature was inviting them to see, to perceive, and to recognize the extraordinary presence that had threaded itself through Varginha. The creature trembled slightly, crimson eyes reflecting sunlight and glimmers of curiosity. Its small body moved with deliberate rhythm, leaving traces that were messages, echoes, and guides all at once. The hidden trail had fulfilled its purpose, leading the town's observers to a place of quiet understanding, a moment of connection, and the gentle awareness that the extraordinary was patient, intelligent, and profoundly deliberate. Night approached slowly, draping the fields and the grove in deep blue. Shadows softened, stars appeared in the sky like distant beacons, and the hidden trail remained, faint but tangible, threading its way through soil, dust, grass, and glimmers. The creature stayed, trembling gently, leaving subtle signs for those who would follow again, patient and persistent in its quiet teaching. Varginha had become a town attuned to the extraordinary, a place where subtle signs, faint tremors and glimmers of light carried meaning. The hidden trail had revealed not only presence, but intention, patience, and communication, a gentle dialogue between human and extraordinary life, threaded delicately through earth, air, and perception. The extraordinary was no longer distant or unknown. It had begun to guide, to teach, and to connect in ways soft, hypnotic, and unforgettable. And as the stars appeared above, the town felt the quiet thrill of understanding the hidden trail had revealed a language beyond words, waiting to be followed further. Chapter 12. Signals at dusk. The sun was setting beautifully over Varginha, spilling molten gold across rooftops, fences, and the rolling fields beyond. Shadows stretched long and fluid, weaving between trees, fences, and the edges of streets, while the air grew heavy with the scent of warm soil, dust, and a faint metallic temps that had become almost familiar. The town moved with a quiet, hesitant rhythm, as if aware that the ordinary world had begun to carry subtle messages, gentle signals left by a presence that could not be fully named, yet could be felt in every rustle of leaves and every shimmering glimmer of light. Carlos de Souza made his way toward the lot, the familiar pole guiding him as always. The fields shimmered in the warm dusk light, subtle arcs of motion in the grass catching his attention, as though the air itself had been set in gentle vibration. He paused frequently, observing faint tremors in the dust, arcs traced in the soil, and small glimmers of metal fragments that reflected the last rays of sun. The extraordinary was no longer just a presence. It was beginning to communicate, leaving deliberate signals meant to be noticed by those patient enough to see. Lilian, Valkyria, and Katia approached the lot from a quiet lane, their eyes sweeping the fields and edges of the grove. The subtle signs were unmistakable. Faint patterns in dust, slight shifts in grass, and tiny glimmers that caught the sunlight and reflected them in a gentle, hypnotic rhythm. They moved carefully, soft-footed, attuned to the signals threaded through the landscape. The hidden trail they had followed earlier seemed to continue, now augmented with signs that spoke more clearly of intention and awareness. The creature lingered near the center of the lot, small, fragile, and deliberate. Its crimson eyes reflected the golden hues of sunset, luminous and patient. It trembled lightly, leaving behind arcs in the dust, slight disturbances in the grass, and subtle glimmers in scattered fragments. These were no longer random traces or accidental patterns, they were signals, messages meant to be observed and interpreted by those willing to notice. The extraordinary presence was learning, as much as it was teaching, threading deliberate cues into the environment around it. Carlos crouched near a fragment of the craft, feeling the faint warmth pulse through the metal beneath his fingertips. A soft hum tickled the edges of his hearing, carried by the breeze in delicate, rhythmic pulses. It was not loud, nor did it carry words, but it resonated with intention, as though the extraordinary presence was calling attention, inviting perception. He lifted his gaze to the edges of the lot, noticing subtle arcs of light across the grasses, delicate movements at the periphery of vision, and tiny shifts in shadows that mirrored the rhythm of the hum. The girls moved deeper into the lot, eyes wide and attentive. Lilian traced arcs in the dust with her fingertips, noticing how each disturbance seemed synchronized with the shimmer of fragments, the tremor of grass, and the gentle vibration of the soil. Valkyria followed patterns in the shadows, watching how they shifted in subtle waves. As the sunlight faded, Katia noticed faint flashes of light reflected from fragments of metal, tiny sparks that moved with deliberate arcs across the lot. Each signal was soft, almost imperceptible, yet undeniably deliberate. The town itself began to respond. Windows reflected faint glimmers of light, as though acknowledging the presence of something beyond ordinary perception. Streetlights flickered softly in rhythm with the subtle vibrations in the air. Shadows moved at the edges of vision, bending and stretching with gentle intention. Even the faint rustle of trees and brush seemed synchronized with the signals, creating a delicate network of observation and response. Varginha had become an organism of awareness, a living witness to the extraordinary presence that threaded through it. Children wandered near the edges of the fields, their curiosity guiding them closer to the subtle signals. Tiny lights flickered at the corners of their vision, moving in arcs that could not be explained by ordinary shadows or sunlight. They whispered to one another, their voices soft and filled with wonder. "It's moving again. Look, over there, do you see? It's like it's trying to show us something." Their excitement was tempered with awe, for the signals carried a weight beyond mere play. They were invitations to perceive, to notice, and to become part of the rhythm the extraordinary was establishing. The creature's tremors became slightly more deliberate, arcs in the dust forming small spirals, footprints weaving delicate patterns, and fragments of metal aligned in ways that caught the fading light with hypnotic precision. Carlos noticed how the signals seemed synchronized with the vibration of the breeze, the subtle shifts in shadows, and the tremor in the soil beneath their feet. Each pulse, each shimmer, each arc was deliberate, carrying meaning beyond what the eye alone could comprehend. It was a language of presence, soft, yet undeniable, guiding attention and perception rather than forcing it. Liliane crouched to observe one of the small spirals in the dust, tracing it with her fingertips and feeling the subtle vibration beneath her hand. Valkyria watched a fragment of metal glimmer in a rhythm that matched the faint hum in the air. Katya noticed the tremor in the grass, as if it carried its own pulse, synchronized with the faint darks and dust and glimmering fragments. Together, they began to perceive a sequence of senza, gentle, hypnotic language that was not spoken, yet unmistakably present. Carlos followed another trail of subtle tremors across the lot, noticing how they converged with arcs in the dust and flashes of reflected light. The signals seemed to guide them toward the grove at the far edge of the field, as if the creature were preparing them, preparing the environment, for an encounter that required attention, patience, and quiet understanding. The extraordinary presence was no longer merely observed. It was deliberately communicating, threading the town into a network of perception that connected human and unknown life alike. The golden light of dusk faded to soft indigo, stars appearing faintly overhead. Shadows deepened and stretched across the lot, creating patterns that echoed the signals in the dust, the tremors in the grass, and the arcs of reflected light. The creature trembled gently in the center of the lot, leaving small, deliberate disturbances that aligned with the fading sunlight and the emerging night. It was teaching the humans to read, to observe, and to perceive the rhythm of presence threaded through the world around them. Children sat quietly at the edges of the grove, eyes wide, noticing arcs of light and tremors in the soil, whispering softly about the patterns they could perceive. Adults paused in their evening routines, glancing toward the fields and noting subtle movements, the glimmer of fragments, and faint vibrations in the air. The extraordinary presence was everywhere, and the town had begun to learn its rhythm, its gentle signals, and its hypnotic language of observation and awareness. Carlos, the girls, and a few others followed the signals to the center of the grove, where the creature's tremors formed a delicate circle. Each arc of dust, each subtle shift in light, each faint vibration of soil aligned with one another, creating a pattern of interaction that was hypnotic in its rhythm and deliberate in its meaning. It was an invitation, a gentle message, a whisper of understanding threaded through presence, observation, and awareness. The creature trembled gently, crimson eyes reflecting the emerging stars. Its small body moved with precision, leaving deliberate signals for the humans who had followed the trail. Each shimmer, each tremor, each arc carried intention, guiding the observers to a moment of quiet connection. The signals were soft, almost invisible, yet undeniably deliberate to patient and hypnotic dialogue between human and extraordinary life. Night deepened over Varginha, cloaking the town, the lot, and the fields in deep blue. Stars scattered across the sky like delicate beacons, echoing the rhythm of the signals below. Shadows moved with soft, deliberate intent. Arcs in dust shimmered faintly, and tremors in the grass pulsed with meaning. The extraordinary had established its communication, teaching patience, attention, and observation, and the town had begun to follow, quietly attuned to its subtle language. In their sleep, residents dreamed of arcs of light, tremors in soil, patterns traced in dust, and whispers in the wind. Children murmured names for shapes they barely understood, sensing presence and intention. Adults dreamt of subtle patterns, faint vibrations, and soft glimmers that spoke of awareness beyond ordinary comprehension. The town had become hypnotically connected to the extraordinary, learning its rhythm, perceiving its signals, and following its gentle guidance. And in the center of the grove, the creature trembled softly, leaving arcs in dust, small disturbances and fragments, and subtle pulses in the soil. Its crimson eyes reflected moonlight and the rhythm of Varginha's awareness. The signals it left were soft but deliberate, guiding, teaching, and threading presence through every corner of the town. The extraordinary had become part of the town, a quiet network of awareness that pulsed beneath the surface of ordinary life, waiting for those who would follow, perceive, and understand. And as night deepened, the whispers and signals would grow more intentional, beckoning the town ever closer to understanding the presence threading through their world. Chapter 13. Patterns of light. The night settled over Varginha like a velvet shroud, deepening the quiet that had come to define the town in recent days. Street lamps cast pools of gentle amber light onto cobblestones and sidewalks. Yet it was the natural darkness between them that seemed to live the space where shadows moved with soft intent, and the ordinary world had become something extraordinary. Even the air carried a faint vibration, a subtle hum that rippled through fields, rooftops, and narrow lanes, as if the town itself were breathing in quiet synchronization with the presence that had quietly threaded itself through its streets. Carlos de Sousa stepped carefully into the lot once again, drawn by the rhythm of observation he had come to sense. In every corner of the ground beneath him still bore the delicate traces of the hidden trail, arcs in the dust, impressions in the soil, and glimmers of metal fragments that reflected faint light in a hypnotic shimmer. He paused, attuning his senses to the soft tremor beneath his feet, the subtle vibrations in the air, and the faint glimmers that seemed to move almost intentionally at the edges of perception. The extraordinary presence was no longer merely observed, it was communicating in ways that were deliberate, almost tactile, woven into the very environment. Lilian, Valkyria, and Katia followed, moving silently through the lot. Each girl had learned to read the subtle language of presence, the arcs in the dust, the delicate tremors in the soil, the faint glimmers of metal reflecting light in patterns that felt almost alive. They understood that these were signals, carefully arranged, meant not for a casual observation but for a patient, attentive perception. The ordinary world had become a canvas for communication, and they were learning to trace its patterns, to follow the rhythm, and to participate in a dialogue that transcended words. The creature waited at the edge of the lot, small, trembling, and deliberate. Its crimson eyes caught the faint glow of the stars, reflecting arcs of light with hypnotic precision. It trembled gently, leaving behind faint impressions in the dust, subtle arcs in the grass, and fragments of metal arranged in tiny, purposeful patterns. These were no longer random signals, they were coordinated, hypnotic displays of intention. Every shimmer, every tremor, every arc in the soil carried meaning, guiding the observers to perceive, to understand, and to respond. Carlos noticed a particularly subtle arrangement of fragments, tiny shards of metal forming arcs that caught the moonlight and reflected it in soft pulses. He traced the pattern with his fingers, feeling the faint vibration beneath the soil, a rhythm that echoed in his chest and resonated with the movement of his own breath. It was as if the extraordinary presence was speaking in light, a silent language of coordination and attention, gently inviting him to observe the unfolding patterns. The girls noticed the changes as well. Lilian watched the tremors and the dust ripple outward in soft, concentric circles. Valkyria observed arcs of reflected light moving along fragments arranged in small, deliberate sequences. Katia saw subtle shadows weaving together across the ground, tracing patterns that seemed to form an almost coherent map when viewed as a whole. The creature was creating a display of visual language of attention, patience, an interaction, one that required the town to slow down, watch carefully, and participate in the quiet, hypnotic exchange. Across the lot, the signals became more complex. Small disturbances in the soil intersected with arcs in dust. Fragments of metal shimmered in synchronized pulses, and subtle shifts in shadows formed delicate geometric shapes. The extraordinary presence was no longer merely leaving traces, it was orchestrating a visual rhythm, a hypnotic display that extended across space, light, and movement. Carlos and the girls moved carefully, attuning themselves to the patterns, feeling the language of the extraordinary unfold around them. The town itself seemed to respond. Street lamps flickered softly, echoing the pulses of reflected light in the lot. Shadows along rooftops stretched and shifted with deliberate rhythm, synchronized with tremors in the fields and subtle arcs of dust. Even the wind seemed to carry a pattern, rustling leaves and grass in gentle waves that mirrored the visual signals below. Varginha had become a living network of perception, A town attuned to the coordinated communication of a presence beyond ordinary understanding. Children wandered near the edges of the grove, quietly observing arcs of light, tremors in soil, and flashes of reflected metal. They whispered in hushed tones, "Look, it's moving this way. Do you see the arcs? It's like it's drawing something." Their voices were filled with awe and curiosity, soft as the night itself, participating in the silent dialogue the creature had established. Even those too young to articulate what they saw sensed the rhythm, the coordination, and the hypnotic pull of attention threaded through the display. Carlos followed a sequence of shimmering fragments, each reflecting faint light in a subtle, deliberate pulse. The pattern formed arcs, spirals, and concentric shapes that led toward the grove's center, where the creature's tremors were synchronized with the reflections. The display was almost like a map, guiding the observers along a path of understanding, inviting them to notice the interplay of light, shadow, dust, and movement. It was a language that could not be spoken, but could be felt, seen, and interpreted through quiet attention and patience. The girls traced the arcs in the dust, noticing how tremors in the soil corresponded with reflected glimmers of metal. Each pulse was hypnotic, drawing their gaze and guiding their movement. The creature's crimson eyes followed them, luminous and patient, reflecting arcs of starlight and the soft rhythm of the coordinated signals. It trembled gently, leaving behind impressions that created an intricate, almost deliberate choreography across the lot, transforming the ordinary landscape into a canvas of perception and awareness. As night deepened, the patterns grew more pronounced. Concentric arcs of dust shimmered faintly. Tiny fragments of metal reflected the soft glow of the moon, and tremors in the soil pulsed in hypnotic rhythm. Even the trees and grasses participated in the display, swaying gently with deliberate arcs, synchronized with the subtle signs below. The creature's signals had become a performance of awareness, a silent dialogue in light, movement, and presence. And the town had begun to learn its language. Carlos and the girls moved through the grove with quiet reverence, attuned to the rhythms, patterns, and pulses. They noticed how arcs intersected, how tremors synchronized with reflected glimmers, and how shadows weaved together to form subtle, deliberate shapes. Each signal carried meaning, guiding attention, observation, and understanding. The extraordinary presence had transformed the night into a living display of awareness, teaching patience, attention, and the art of perceiving the invisible. The creature remained at the center of the grove, small and trembling, crimson eyes reflecting arcs of light and subtle pulses of vibration in the air. Its tremors and impressions left behind a coordinated display that the humans could follow, interpret, and respond to. It was patient, deliberate, and hypnotic, teaching them a language that existed not in words, but in light, movement, and presence. The extraordinary had become a teacher, the town a student, and the night a canvas for interaction. Across Varginha, subtle signs mirrored the patterns in the lot. Street lamps flickered in soft synchrony, shadows shifted in deliberate rhythm, and the faint hum of air and soil echoed the coordinated pulses of the visual display. The town had become a participant, attuned to the extraordinary presence in its hypnotic patterns, learning to perceive the world with new sensitivity, curiosity, and awareness. Even as the night deepened and stars scattered across the sky, the creature's signals continued, delicate, deliberate, and hypnotic. Arcs in dust, tremors in soil, reflections from fragments of metal, and subtle movements in shadows created a tapestry of perception that enveloped the lot, the grove, and the surrounding fields. Varginha had become a living network of observers, participating in the silent, hypnotic dialogue, attuned to the patterns of light and movement that the extraordinary presence had woven into their world. Carlos and the girls paused at the edge of the grove, noticing the full extent of the patterns. Arc intersected with arc, tremor synchronized with glimmer, shadow danced with reflection. The signals formed a mesmerizing display of deliberate attention, patience, and communication. It was a language without words, a hypnotic dialogue of light, movement, and presence, and the town had become part of it, quietly participating in the extraordinary rhythm threaded through every corner of their world. The creature trembled softly, crimson eyes reflecting the moon and starlight, arcs and dust, and subtle glimmers and fragments. Its small body moved with precision, leaving behind coordinated signals, teaching the town the art of perception, attention, and awareness. The patterns of light were no longer just signs, they were a silent language, a hypnotic rhythm, and a gentle communication that connected the extraordinary and ordinary in a shared experience of curiosity, wonder, and quiet understanding. And as dawn approached, the patterns of light faded slowly, leaving behind traces of a language that would guide the town ever deeper into understanding the presence among them. Chapter 14. The breath of curiosity morning came to Varginha with a gentle hush, the kind of quiet that carries its own awareness. The sun spilled soft light across rooftops and fields, the golden hue bending along fences and tree branches. The town stirred slowly, but not quite in the same rhythm as before. Something intangible had settled over the streets, dusting the ordinary with a sense of expectancy. It was a quiet pulse, a breath of anticipation that threaded through the air like the faint scent of metal and tilled soil. For those who had begun to notice, the extraordinary was no longer something to glimpse, it was something to feel. Carlos de Sousa moved toward the grove with deliberate steps. Each morning, since the falling craft and the hidden trails had become a journey in perception, a patient exercise in noticing the subtle signals left by the presence. He observed tremors in the soil, arcs in dust, faint glimmers of metal, and the soft play of shadow and sunlight across the fields. The extraordinary had begun to weave itself into everyday life, threading subtle patterns through the rhythm of Varginha, and he was learning to perceive them with a growing sense of curiosity and understanding. Liliane, Valkyria, and Katia arrived shortly after, moving quietly along the worn paths of the lot. Each girl had become attuned to the delicate language of Sinzda, tremor of soil, the shimmer of fragments. The arcs traced in dust done together, they moved as though part of a coordinated observation, a silent dance with the extraordinary presence. Their footsteps were soft, their breathing careful, attuned to every nuance of movement, light, and vibration around them. The creature waited near the center of the grove, small, fragile, and deliberate. Its crimson eyes caught the morning light and reflected arcs and tremors and patterns that felt almost alive. It trembled gently, leaving behind impressions in dust, subtle shifts in soil, and glimmers of metal fragments arranged with intention. These signs were no longer merely guides. They were invitations. Each pulse, each arc, each glimmer was a breath of curiosity, a quiet beckoning to explore, observe, and understand the extraordinary rhythm threading through the ordinary. Carlos crouched near a fragment of metal, feeling the faint warmth beneath his fingertips. A soft, almost imperceptible vibration pulsed from it, resonating with the hum in the air and the subtle movement of soil underfoot. It was a rhythm that suggested presence, attention, an intention and invitation to look closer, to breathe with awareness, and to notice the extraordinary embedded in ordinary space. He traced the arcs in the dust, following their gentle curves, feeling a hypnotic rhythm in their flow, a pulse that seemed almost alive. The girls followed the delicate cues, observing the tremors in the soil, the glimmers of fragments, and the arcs traced in dust. Liliane crouched to feel the faint pulse beneath her fingers, sensing intention in each subtle shift. Valkyria watched arcs of light reflecting from metal fragments, each pulse synchronized with tremors in the soil. Katia noticed shadows weaving together in soft, deliberate patterns, connecting arcs, tremors, and reflections into a quiet choreography. The creature was teaching them the language of curiosity, threading subtle patterns that invited attention rather than demanded it. The town itself seemed to respond to this quiet rhythm. Windows reflected faint glimmers of light, subtle and deliberate. Street lamps flickered gently in synchrony with tremors in soil and arcs of dust. Shadows along rooftops and fences shifted with intention, echoing the pulses left by the creature. Even the faint breeze carried a gentle rhythm, rustling leaves and grass in arcs that mirrored the delicate choreography below. Varginha had become a participant in an intricate conversation between the ordinary and the extraordinary. A dialogue of curiosity and awareness threaded through every corner of the town. Children wandered at the edges of the lot and grove, noticing faint glimmers, soft tremors, and subtle arcs in dust and soil. They whispered to one another in hushed tones, curiosity lighting their faces. It's moving again. Do you see the pattern? It's like it wants us to follow. Their eyes sparkled with wonder, and their soft laughter became part of the gentle rhythm of observation. Even their simplest interactions, stepping, pausing, seemed to resonate with the patterns left by the creature. Carlos traced another sequence of arcs in the dust, following a subtle pulse that led toward a small cluster of trees at the far edge of the grove. The tremors in the soil grew slightly stronger, synchronized with faint glimmers of metal reflecting sunlight in arcs that suggested movement, intention, and direction. The signals were no longer random, they were deliberate, orchestrated with hypnotic precision. Each step forward felt like breathing in harmony with the extraordinary, following its gentle rhythm and curiosity-driven guidance. The girls moved carefully behind him, observing the delicate choreography unfolding across the grove. Tremors intersected with arcs in dust. Metal fragments shimmered in synchronized pulses, and subtle shadows weaved through the trees in soft, deliberate motions. The creature's small body trembled with rhythm, leaving behind impressions that were at once delicate and purposeful, guiding attention and perception without force, without words, only perception. Even the birds and insects seemed to join the hypnotic display. Birds traced arcs across the sky, gliding in spirals and loops that mirrored the tremors in the soil. Fireflies began to appear in small clusters, their soft flickers synchronized with reflections from metal fragments below. Even the hum of distant insects seemed part of the network, pulsing in rhythm with arcs, glimmers, and tremors. The town had become attuned to the extraordinary presence, participating quietly in its hypnotic language of curiosity and awareness. Carlos followed the trail into the cluster of trees, noticing subtle signs etched into bark and leaves, small scratches, faint tremors in the soil around roots, and glimmers of sunlight reflecting through leaves formed arcs that suggested pathways, pauses, and points of attention. Each sign was delicate, deliberate, and hypnotic, encouraging careful observation, patience, and curiosity. The extraordinary presence had transformed the grove into a living canvas, a network of communication threaded through soil, dust, light, and movement. The girls circled the trees, noticing patterns in shadows, tremors, and arcs of dust that seemed to respond to each motion, each breath, each movement they made. The creature's crimson eyes followed them, luminous and patient, reflecting the patterns of light and tremors around it. Its small, trembling body left signs that were almost like punctuation in a sentence. Pause here, an arc there, a flicker of light as emphasis, guiding them along a path of quiet discovery and understanding. Night began to descend again, stars scattering across the sky like scattered points of curiosity. Shadows lengthened, arcs in dust glimmered faintly, and tremors pulsed softly beneath the soil. The creature remained at the center of the grove, small, deliberate, and patient, leaving behind signs that invited perception, observation, and engagement. The town had become a silent participant in a dialogue that existed beyond words, beyond ordinary sight, a conversation woven from curiosity, rhythm, and subtle awareness. Carlos, the girls, and a few others paused to observe the full scope of the signals. Arc intersected with arc, tremor with glimmer, shadow with reflection. The display created a hypnotic choreography of awareness, an invitation to breathe with the extraordinary, to follow the subtle rhythm threaded through the environment, and to participate in a silent dialogue of perception and understanding. The creature's tremors and arcs had become a deliberate language, a breath of curiosity woven into the world around them. As the night deepened, the signals continued, each tremor in soil, arc in dust, and glimmer in fragment carrying intention. The town had become attuned to the language of the extraordinary, learning to move with patience, perception, and curiosity. The creature's small body trembled gently, crimson eyes reflecting moonlight, arcs, and subtle glimmers, leaving behind signs that were at once hypnotic, deliberate, and alive. Varginha had learned the rhythm of observation, the art of perception, and the gentle language of the extraordinary. Each breath, each pause, each deliberate trace left by the creature carried meaning beyond words, a silent encouragement to explore, notice, and follow curiosity wherever it led. The town had become alive in a new way, attuned to a rhythm that had always existed but had been unnoticed until the extraordinary began to show its subtle language, threading the ordinary with deliberate, hypnotic signals. And as the moon climbed higher, the town felt the quiet pull of curiosity once more, drawing them deeper into the delicate rhythm of the extraordinary. Chapter 15. Echoes in the grove. Night wrapped Varginha in its deep indigo cloak. The stars, delicate points of light scattered across the sky like whispers of another world. The town slept uneasily in its quiet, carrying memories of shadows and glimmers, of tremors and crimson eyes. Yet beneath the slumbering streets, beneath the fields and rooftops, a rhythm had begun to settle. It was faint, subtle, almost imperceptible, but for those attuned it hummed like the pulse of a hidden life. A silent message resonating through the grove, through the lot, and into the hearts of those who had learned to watch. Carlos de Souza moved carefully into the grove, feet brushing softly over dust and fallen leaves, ears straining for the delicate vibrations that whispered beneath the soil. Each step carried him deeper into the hypnotic rhythm, where tremors, arcs, and glimmers interlaced to form patterns that seemed alive. The creature had become deliberate in its actions, leaving trails not only in dust and metal, but in subtle pulses that vibrated through the very earth. The echoes of its presence were no longer just visual, they were tactile, felt through the soles of feet, through the hands brushing the soil, and through the quiet breath of the night air. Liliane, Valqueria, and Katia followed, their movements soft and intentional. Each had learned the rhythm of observation, sensing the faint hum beneath the soil, feeling the delicate vibrations in arcs of dust and glimmers of metal. The creature's presence was no longer distant, it resonated in every subtle quiver of air, every tremor underfoot, every shift in shadow. Their eyes followed arcs of light, tremors, and reflections, mapping each pulse and responding to the silent guidance threaded into the night. The grove was alive with echoes. Tremors in the soil vibrated faintly beneath their hands and feet. Arcs in dust shimmered softly in the moonlight, and tiny metal fragments reflected light in subtle pulses. The creature's crimson eyes glimmered from the center, luminous and patient, watching as humans learned to read the language it had begun to write across the environment. It trembled gently, leaving behind a choreography of subtle motion that resonated like a heartbeat, a quiet echo calling attention, inviting observation, and demanding patience. Carlos knelt near one of the fragments, feeling a soft vibration pulse through his fingers. It was not loud, not sudden, but hypnotic and persistent, a rhythm that seemed to extend beyond touch into perception itself. The echoes were deliberate, rhythmic patterns that resonated through the grove, weaving together soil, dust, light, and presence. He traced the arcs in the dust, following their gentle curves, and each step seemed to synchronize with the subtle tremors, creating a delicate feedback between human perception and the extraordinary rhythm of the grove. The girls moved carefully, eyes wide, breathing soft, attuned to every vibration and shimmer. Liliane noticed faint ripples in dust arcs, rhythmic and deliberate, like a pulse of life, threaded invisibly through the soil. Valqueria watched the glimmers of metal fragments catch moonlight in soft, timed sequences, synchronized with tremors beneath their feet. Katia observed shadows weaving in gentle, deliberate arcs, stretching and contracting with rhythm as if the grove itself had become alive, vibrating in response to the extraordinary presence. The town seemed to join the pulse. Windows reflected faint glimmers in synchronization with tremors. Street lamps flickered subtly as if echoing the rhythm of the grove, and shadows along walls and rooftops moved with gentle intention. The extraordinary presence had begun to orchestrate not only the grove, but the surrounding town, threading a network of hypnotic, silent communication through every surface, every vibration, every reflection. Varginha had become a living map of perception, its inhabitants unwittingly synchronized with the echoes of the unknown. Carlos followed a sequence of subtle tremors toward a hollow in the grove, a small indentation in the earth, lined with glimmers of metal fragments. Each pulse, each quivered in the soil, seemed to guide him, rhythmically drawing him closer to the center. He felt the echoes through the soles of his feet, through the palms of his hands as he brushed against the earth, and even through the faint hum of the air around him. Every signal was deliberate, each echo carrying meaning beyond the ordinary, a silent instruction in observation, awareness, and patience. The girls traced their way through arcs of dust and shimmering fragments, sensing the pattern, feeling the rhythm, and understanding the subtle choreography unfolding around them. Liliane paused to feel the tremors beneath her fingers, small vibrations pulsing like tiny heartbeats. Valkyria observed a reflection from a fragment align with a shadow across the grove, creating a fleeting shape that seemed purposeful and hypnotic. Katya noticed how arcs of dust intersected with tremors, forming concentric circles that radiated outward, drawing attention to the echoes of presence layered across the grove. The creature's small, trembling body left deliberate signs with every movement. Arcs, tremors, and reflections formed a hypnotic pattern, synchronized in rhythm, like a silent pulse beating across the grove. Each sign carried intention, guiding the humans in perception, patience, and observation. The echoes became a language without words, a dialogue woven from subtle vibrations, shifting shadows, and glimmers of light. It was a rhythm meant to be felt, traced, and followed, a gentle lesson in awareness threaded into the ordinary. Even the smallest details carried meaning. Fallen leaves trembled in gentle arcs when the creature moved near them. Shadows bent softly with subtle intention, and fragments of metal glimmered in sequences almost imperceptible. Carlos and the girls noticed the faint pulse in each signal, the rhythm of echoes vibrating through the earth, and the way the patterns interlaced to form a hypnotic choreography of presence. The grove was alive with silent messages, and the town, through their observation, had become attuned to its rhythm. Children lingered at the edges of the grove, sensing the gentle echoes of motion in soil, dust, and reflection. They whispered softly to one another, marveling at the delicate pulses. It's like the ground is alive. The light, it's moving in rhythm. Do you feel it too? Their fascination was quiet and reverent, their curiosity in harmony with the subtle signals threading through the night. Even their small movements, soft steps, and whispered breath became part of the hypnotic rhythm, a response to the pulses left by the extraordinary presence. Carlos traced another sequence of subtle echoes deeper into the grove, following a hollow where tremors pulsed strongest. Arcs of dust, glimmers of fragments, and rhythmic vibrations in the soil converged to form a hypnotic pattern that guided him. Gently, deliberately, each pulse felt alive, communicating intention and awareness. The echoes were teaching him patience, the art of careful observation, and the delicate language of the extraordinary, a silent dialogue between the unseen and those who had learned to notice. The girls followed, attentive and deliberate, moving through arcs, tremors, and glimmers, sensing the rhythm, tracing the pulses, and engaging with the silent choreography. Liliane noticed subtle shifts in shadows across the grove, timed with tremors beneath her feet. Valkyria observed reflections from fragments that pulsed in synchronization with dust arcs, forming fleeting geometric patterns. Katya felt the vibrations through the soles of her feet, sensing the echoes as though the grove itself were alive, breathing and responding to presence. Night deepened further, and the grove became a sanctuary of observation. Tremors, arcs, reflections, and subtle vibrations wove together into a continuous, hypnotic language. The creature remained at the center, small, deliberate, and patient, leaving echoes behind with every motion. Its crimson eyes reflected starlight, shimmering fragments, and the rhythmic pulse of tremors in soil. Each signal invited attention, careful observation, and quiet engagement, teaching the town to perceive the extraordinary woven delicately through the ordinary. Carlos and the girls paused at the center of the grove, noticing the full choreography of echoes. Tremor intersected with arc, glimmer synchronized with shadow, and every subtle vibration pulsed in hypnotic rhythm. The creature's tremors and arcs had become deliberate, a silent, breathing language of perception. Varginha, in its quiet awareness, had become a participant in a dialogue beyond words, threaded through subtle rhythms, faint pulses, and hypnotic echoes. The night carried the grove's message into the surrounding fields, across rooftops, and along streets. The echoes, faint but persistent, touched windows, chimneys, and the air itself. threading a network of attention and observation through the town. Each pulse, each tremor, each arc and dust or glimmer of metal was a lesson in patience, awareness, and curiosity. Varginha had learned to listen, to feel, and to move in rhythm with the extraordinary presence, its echoes weaving a hypnotic, silent conversation with all who would notice. And in the quiet, trembling presence of the creature, the grove had become a place of awareness. Crimson eyes, soft tremors, and arcs of light formed a continuous rhythm, a language of silent pulses and hypnotic echoes, connecting human attention to the extraordinary. Varginha had become alive in a new way, attuned to subtlety, curiosity, and the delicate choreography of life threaded through the unseen, waiting for those patient enough to follow its rhythm. And as the grove pulsed softly under the moonlight, the echoes carried a quiet promise that every movement, every tremor, every glimmer was an invitation to venture further into understanding. Chapter 16. Whispers beneath the leaves. The grove awoke slowly under the faint light of dawn, the morning mist curling delicately around tree trunks and brushing softly across the earth. A gentle hush lay over Varginha, broken only by the distant hum of light, the chirp of birds, the rustle of leaves, the soft whisper of wind. It was a quiet rhythm, one that had been subtly altered by the extraordinary presence threading itself through the town. Those who had learned to notice could feel it everywhere, in tremors beneath the soil, in arcs traced in dust, and now, more delicately, in the subtle movement of leaves and branches. Carlos de Souza stepped carefully into the grove, feeling the familiar pulse of the earth beneath his feet. The arcs of dust and glimmers of metal had become part of the morning ritual, a hypnotic language he had grown accustomed to following. But now, new patterns had emerged, more elusive, more delicate. Tiny scratches on bark, subtle indentations in soil, and faint shifts in leaves carried messages almost too subtle to notice but for those patient enough to look. The grove whispered secrets in the language of presence. Lilian, Vulcaria, and Katia followed, each of them moving quietly, attuned to the faint pulses that vibrated through the grove. Their eyes swept over trembling leaves, small clusters of moss, and thin branches swaying in patterns that seemed deliberate. The extraordinary presence was guiding them, not with loud signals, but with whispers embedded in the natural world itself. Each leaf that quivered, each branch that bent slightly, became a subtle punctuation in a silent dialogue, a soft thread of communication designed to draw attention, curiosity, and understanding. The creature waited at the center of the grove, small and fragile, crimson eyes reflecting the soft morning light. It trembled gently, leaving subtle signs among the foliage. Small arcs in moss, barely visible tremors in the soil, and soft pulses of reflected light bouncing through leaves. These were quiet invitations, delicate patterns meant for careful observation. The messages were less immediate, less commanding than before, but more intimate in encouragement to notice, to slow down, and to engage with the extraordinary in a more personal, reflective way. Carlos crouched near a small cluster of moss at the base of an ancient tree, feeling faint vibrations through the tips of his fingers. The tremor was soft, almost imperceptible, yet deliberate, a subtle echo of presence threaded through the grove. Each pulse resonated with the sway of leaves above, the soft glimmer of dew, and the gentle arcs of light that fell through the canopy. The extraordinary presence was teaching a new rhythm, one woven into natural elements, and discovered only through patience and careful observation. The girls moved softly along the edges of the grove, noticing the faintest tremors in soil beneath scattered leaves, the subtle quiver of branches, and delicate arcs traced in patches of moss. Lilian reached out to brush a leaf and felt it quiver in response, a gentle reminder of the hidden pulse beneath the ordinary. Vulcaria observed how the morning light reflected off duladen leaves, tracing arcs that aligned with tremors in the soil. Katia sensed the rhythm of shadows shifting through foliage, soft pulses woven seamlessly with the movement of branches and leaves. Each sign was a whisper, quiet and hypnotic, inviting perception without force. Even the breeze seemed to participate in the dialogue. It rustled leaves with a soft, deliberate rhythm, moving in arcs that echoed tremors beneath the soil and the faint shimmer of fragments hidden among branches. Tiny insects carried the rhythm as well, their movements synchronized with subtle vibrations, as if the grove itself had become a living, conscious organism responding to the presence and intention of the extraordinary visitor. Varginha, through its careful observers, had become part of this delicate, silent conversation. Carlos followed a path marked by subtle tremors and soft pulses beneath moss and fallen leaves, leading toward a small clearing in the grove. The arcs traced through dust, reflections on fragments, and tremors in soil converged here, forming a hypnotic choreography that guided attention and perception. Each signal, each whisper of movement in the leaves, carried intention, shaping a gentle narrative that invited observation, patience, and understanding. The girls moved along with him, tracing subtle arcs of moss and following faint glimmers of dew in rhythmic pulses. Liliane paused to feel the vibrations through her fingertips, sensing the quiet heartbeat of the grove. Valqueria watched, reflected light bounce softly through leaves, aligning with tremors beneath her feet. Katya observed shadows bending and stretching with deliberate motion, forming patterns that, when combined with tremors and reflections, created a delicate tapestry of silent communication. The extraordinary presence had transformed the grove into a living canvas of whispers and pulses, a silent dialogue woven into every leaf, branch, and fragment. Small creatures of the grove seemed aware as well. Birds landed softly on branches, adjusting their positions in ways that mirrored the arcs and dust below. Fireflies hovered in faint clusters, their soft flickers in gentle rhythm with the tremors and reflected light. Even the soft rustle of rodents in the underbrush followed a subtle, deliberate pulse that harmonized with the grove's hypnotic language. Varginha had become an orchestra of perception, with each living element quietly participating in the silent communication of the extraordinary presence. Carlos knelt to examine a small cluster of duladen leaves, tracing the arc of light reflected on them with his fingertips. The tremors beneath the moss, the subtle quiver of the leaves, and the gentle pulses and fragments of metal formed a continuous rhythm that resonated with his own breath and heartbeat. Each echo of presence, no matter how delicate, carried meaning, teaching patience, attention, and the quiet art of observation. The grove was alive with whispers, a language of subtle intention woven seamlessly into natural elements. The girls followed each delicate cue, moving softly through arcs of moss, tremors in soil, and gentle reflections in dew. Liliane noticed the subtle vibrations in each leaf she touched, aligning with tremors beneath the soil. Valqueria observed how reflected light traced gentle arcs that synchronized with pulses in soil and dust. Katya sensed how shadows moved deliberately through the grove, bending softly with rhythm and intention. Each whisper beneath the leaves became a message, a quiet encouragement to notice, to engage, and to perceive the extraordinary through patience and presence. The creature's crimson eyes followed them, luminous and patient, reflecting arcs of light, tremors, and subtle pulses throughout the grove. Its small, trembling body left delicate traces across moss, soil, and leaves, teaching the town the rhythm of perception in a new, quieter language. The whispers beneath the leaves were intimate, subtle, and hypnotic, guiding attention through observation rather than insistence, inviting the humans to participate in the slow, deliberate dance of understanding. Even as the sun climbed higher, dispersing the morning mist, the whispers persisted. Tremors, arcs, reflections, and subtle pulses continued to weave a hypnotic tapestry across the grove. Each movement carried meaning. Each quiver in a leaf or branch became part of the rhythm. Each soft vibration beneath moss or soil an invitation to observe. The extraordinary presence had mastered a delicate, intimate form of communication, one that required patience, awareness, and curiosity to perceive. Carlos and the girls paused at the clearing center, noting how tremors intersected with arcs. Reflections synchronized with pulses, and shadows moved in gentle choreography with leaves and branches. The creatures, tremors, and arcs had evolved into whispers, delicate yet deliberate, a silent language that threaded presence through every natural element of the grove. Varginha had become a participant in this intimate dialogue, attuned to subtle signs and rhythmic pulses, learning the art of noticing the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. The grove pulsed softly, every leaf, branch, fragment, and tremor, contributing to a hypnotic network of whispers. The creature trembled gently at the center, crimson eyes reflecting arcs of light, subtle quivers in moss, and pulses in soil. Each whisper beneath the leaves carried intention, encouraging observation, patience, and curiosity. The town had learned to breathe with the grove, to move with the rhythm of the extraordinary, and to notice the delicate whispers that carried meaning without words. Even as the day began to brighten fully, the whispers persisted. Tremors pulsed faintly beneath moss and soil. Arcs shimmered subtly across dust and fragments, and reflections danced gently on dewladen leaves. The creature had created a network of silent communication, a hypnotic dialogue threaded through natural elements, encouraging Varginha to observe, perceive, and participate in a rhythm of awareness far beyond ordinary perception. And in the grove, the creature trembled softly, crimson eyes reflecting the light, shadows, and tremors surrounding it. Every leaf, every fragment, every subtle movement whispered a quiet message, a gentle invitation to continue following, noticing, and understanding. The town had become attuned to the language of whispers beneath the leaves, learning patience, awareness, and the hypnotic art of observation threaded delicately through the extraordinary. And as the day wore on, the whispers beneath the leaves hinted at a deeper secret yet to be discovered, waiting for those patient enough to follow its subtle rhythm. Chapter 17. Trails of the Unseen. As twilight draped itself over Varginha, a hush settled across the town, the kind of stillness that made every breath feel deliberate, every sound amplified, every shadow alive with possibility. The ordinary streets seemed different now, threaded with an invisible network of meaning. Each corner, each alley, each cluster of trees whispered hints of the extraordinary. It was subtle at first, a faint tremor underfoot, a glimmer of reflected light, a shadow that moved with gentle intention, but, for those who had learned to observe, the town had begun to reveal secret trails, pathways laid by a presence no longer confined to the grove. Carlos de Souza stepped cautiously onto the familiar streets, senses sharpened by weeks of observing tremors, arcs, and whispers beneath the leaves. He had learned to feel the pulse of the extraordinary through soil, dust, and fragments of metal, and now that pulse extended beyond the grove, weaving subtly into the town itself. The air carried a faint hum, almost like a vibration under the skin, and small glimmers of light traced arcs along fences, rooftops, and even cobblestones. These were trails, deliberate and hypnotic, pathways meant to be followed with patience and curiosity. Liliane, Valkyria, and Katia joined him, stepping softly along the edges of the streets. Their eyes flicked to shadows that seemed to move deliberately, two reflections that shimmered in sync with tremors beneath cobblestones, and two faint glimmers of light dancing along metal surfaces. Each movement of the town felt orchestrated, subtle, deliberated continuation of the communication that had begun in the grove, now extended outward into the everyday world. They understood that these were not random signs. They were trails of intention, silent messages waiting for careful observation. The creature had left these trails with patience, embedding subtle signs into the town's familiar structures. A faint quiver in the soil along a sidewalk, a cluster of dewladen leaves arranged in arcs, a reflection of lamplight bouncing across a window at just the right angle each, was a breadcrumb leading observers deeper into understanding. These were silent instructions, gentle cues meant to teach patience, perception, and awareness. The ordinary world had become a living canvas for the extraordinary, a playground of quiet signals threaded through familiar streets and hidden corners. Carlos followed a series of subtle tremors along a narrow alley. Each pulse was faint, almost imperceptible, yet deliberate and hypnotic, vibrating through the soles of his feet and echoing in his awareness. The tremors guided him past familiar shops, through empty plazas, and into quiet courtyards that had previously gone unnoticed. Arcs of reflected light from windows and fragments of metal traced a path, synchronizing with tremors beneath his feet. Each step felt like a dialogue, a subtle conversation between human perception and the rhythm of the unseen. The girls followed quietly, observing the delicate choreography. Liliane noticed tremors beneath scattered leaves along the alley, sensing intention in every subtle quiver. Valkyria saw how light reflected off windows in a slow, deliberate sequence, aligning with arcs in dust on the pavement. Katya traced shadows, moving along walls and fences, stretching and contracting in synchrony with tremors beneath the ground. Each sign, each pulse, each arc was part of a broader trail, a path of discovery laid out by a presence that moved unseen, but with precise, hypnotic purpose. The trails led them toward the outskirts of the town, where empty fields and clusters of trees opened into spaces less familiar. Here, the tremors pulsed more clearly, the arcs of light shimmered more brightly, and the whispers of the extraordinary became almost tangible. Each movement of leaves, each glimmer of dew, each subtle vibration beneath their feet was a guide, gently urging the observers forward. The creature's presence was no longer confined to the grove, it had extended into the broader landscape, integrating the town itself into a silent, hypnotic map of discovery. Children wandered at the edges of the trails, drawn by curiosity rather than instruction. They noticed subtle tremors in soil along their path, glimmers of light reflecting through fences, and arcs traced in dust along rooftops. Their soft laughter and quiet whispers became part of the rhythm, their presence harmonizing with the trails laid out by the extraordinary being. Each child, in their small and attentive way, participated in the silent choreography, stepping carefully, observing patiently, and noticing what others might have overlooked. Carlos reached a small courtyard framed by old stone walls. Tremors pulsed faintly beneath the cobblestones. Arcs traced in dust, and fragments of metal shimmered softly in the dim light. The trail had led him here deliberately, guiding him to a point of observation where multiple signs intersected. He felt the rhythm through the soles of his feet, through his hands as they brushed the pavement, and through the subtle hum in the air. It was a silent message. Notice, observe, and participate in the rhythm of the unseen. The girls traced the trails alongside him, pausing to feel tremors beneath their fingers, watch arcs in dust, and observe reflections that pulsed with deliberate rhythm. Liliane crouched to touch a fragment, sensing the vibration it emitted, faint but precise. Valkyria noted a pattern in reflected light bouncing across a nearby window, perfectly aligned with tremors beneath the ground. Katya observed shadows weaving along the walls, creating shapes that synchronized with every subtle pulse in the courtyard. Together, they mapped the choreography of the trails, following the silent instruction of the unseen presence. The trails led further, winding through narrow streets, across small bridges, and into quiet plazas. Tremors became pulses, arcs shimmered, brighter, and reflections aligned in gentle choreography. Even the air seemed to carry subtle vibrations, brushing lightly against skin and hair, threading a quiet rhythm that connected observer to the extraordinary presence. Every step along these trails was a participation in a dialogue that transcended words, a silent language woven through vibration, light, shadow, and presence. Carlos noticed small details that had been previously overlooked. A faint indentation in a stone ledge, a barely visible arc in a patch of dust, a subtle quiver in leaves growing near the sidewalk. Each was part of the hypnotic choreography, guiding attention, teaching patience, and encouraging perception. The extraordinary presence had mastered the art of subtlety, leaving behind signs that demanded careful observation and quiet participation rather than forceful interaction. The girls observed these nuances closely, moving softly and deliberately. Liliane traced tremors beneath leaves and moss along the edges of the streets. Valkyria followed arcs of light bouncing across window panes, and Katya noticed reflections shimmering subtly on fragments embedded in the earth. Each sign was a breadcrumb along the trail, a piece of the silent map the creature had drawn across the town, teaching the art of noticing, following, and engaging with the unseen rhythm of the extraordinary. Even the natural world participated in the choreography. Leaves swayed in gentle arcs. Branches trembled subtly in alignment with pulses in soil, and water in small fountains reflected glimmers of light that synchronized with tremors beneath cobblestones. Birds moved in patterns, echoing arcs traced along walls, while insects and fireflies added their own subtle pulses to the rhythm. Varginha had become a living canvas, its townscape and natural elements woven seamlessly into the hypnotic trails laid by the extraordinary presence. As night failed, the trails grew clearer, though still subtle. Tremors pulsed faintly beneath the soil. Arcs shimmered in dust and metal fragments, and reflections aligned with delicate rhythm. Carlos and the girls paused in a quiet plaza, tracing the full choreography of the trails and observing the patterns converge. The creature's crimson eyes were not visible, but its presence was felt, guiding them gently, patiently, with deliberate intention. Every pulse, every tremor, every reflection was a step in a silent dialogue, a language of the unseen woven into the very fabric of the town. The extraordinary presence had extended its reach beyond the grove, integrating the town itself into a hypnotic rhythm of observation and curiosity. Tremors, arcs, reflections, and subtle vibrations were trails, invitations to explore, and instructions for patience. Varginha had become a participant in a living, breathing network of perception, where the unseen communicated through quiet signals and the attentive learned to follow, observe, and understand. Carlos and the girls lingered in the plaza, feeling the rhythm of the trails beneath their feet, in their hands, and through the air. They understood now that the town itself was part of the extraordinary choreography. Each street, plaza, alley, and natural element woven into a silent dialogue of curiosity and awareness. The trails of the unseen were everywhere, waiting for those willing to follow, notice, and participate in the subtle, hypnotic rhythm that connected the ordinary and extraordinary in Varginha. And as the moon rose high above the town, the trails of the unseen stretched onward, beckoning the curious to wander further into the silent dance of discovery. Chapter 18. Glimmers. Beyond the horizon. The horizon of Varginha stretched wide beneath a sky brushed with fading twilight, the faint blush of sunset softening into the deep blue of night. Beyond the fields, past the familiar streets and groves, there lay spaces the town had seldom explored, edges of reality where ordinary life blended seamlessly into whispers of the unknown. It was here, at the margins of perception, that the extraordinary presence began to extend its reach, leaving traces not confined to the grove, the lot, or the winding streets, but across the horizon itself, where the ordinary met the possibility of something larger. Carlos de Souza walked along a narrow ridge overlooking distant fields, his eyes tracing arcs of light dancing across the edges of the horizon. Glimmers tiny, deliberate flashes of reflection caught the fading sun, pulsing faintly in rhythm with subtle tremors in the soil beneath his feet. These were signals, soft and hypnotic, beckoning attention without demanding it. He felt the pulse resonate through him, a quiet vibration that threaded together land, light, and perception. The extraordinary presence had begun to reach beyond the familiar, creating a network of signs stretching toward the horizon. Lilian, Voqueria, and Katia followed closely, moving softly along the ridge. Each step was deliberate, each glance careful, as they scanned for faint cues in the landscape. Lilian noticed small glimmers of reflected light along distant rooftops, synchronized with tremors in the soil beneath scattered rocks. Voqueria observed arcs of dust and soil disturbed in the shape of subtle patterns, hinting at a choreography that extended far beyond the town itself. Katia traced faint, deliberate shifts in shadows cast by trees and fences, seeing connections between distant points that suggested intention and rhythm. Together, they followed these quiet signals, mapping a network that stretched outward, expanding the town's awareness into the unseen spaces beyond. The creature's influence had become more subtle here, less immediate but no less deliberate. Tremors beneath the soil, arcs of reflected light, and faint quivers in distant foliage were signals meant to be interpreted slowly, with patience and attention. These glimmers beyond the horizon were invitations to notice, to perceive, to explore the boundaries of ordinary experience, and to consider the extraordinary threads that connected familiar places to unknown spaces. The town of Varginha, once confined in its perception, was being drawn outward, beyond the edges of the everyday, toward a broader rhythm that was patient, quiet, and hypnotic. Carlos knelt on the ridge, feeling vibrations beneath his hands as he brushed against soil and scattered stones. The pulses were faint but persistent, forming a subtle cadence that resonated with the arcs of light stretching across the distant fields. He traced a path along the glimmers, feeling the hypnotic rhythm thread through him, guiding attention and thought. The extraordinary presence was no longer contained. It had begun to communicate through distance, integrating land, light, and shadow into a choreography of perception that required awareness, curiosity, and patience to follow. The girls moved carefully, tracing subtle tremors, arcs, and glimmers across the ridge and into the open fields beyond. Liliane noticed that clusters of grass and small stones quivered faintly, forming patterns that aligned with distant reflections on rooftops and metal fragments. Valkyria observed arcs and dust, disturbed by wind or movement, tracing delicate connections between points on the horizon. Katya felt vibrations in the soil beneath her feet, sensing a rhythm that extended outward, linking familiar terrain to unknown spaces. Each subtle cue was a signal, a silent message carried on tremors, light, and shadow. Even the natural elements participated in this extended network. The wind traced gentle arcs through grass and leaves, synchronized with tremors beneath soil and pulses of reflected light on distant objects. Birds moved in deliberate patterns, wings slicing through the air in arcs that echoed tremors in the earth. Fireflies, appearing earlier than usual for the season, flickered in clusters that mirrored subtle pulses from glimmers across the horizon. The town and the surrounding environment had become a single, living canvas. Threaded into the network of signs, the extraordinary presence had begun to leave beyond the familiar edges of Varginha. Carlos followed a faint trail of glimmers across the fields, noting how arcs of reflection, trembling leaves, and subtle soil vibrations converged into a hypnotic rhythm. Each step felt like participation in a conversation without words, a dialogue carried through distance, light, and subtle movement. The extraordinary presence was expanding its choreography, teaching the observers the art of perception across a broader landscape, showing that awareness and attention could bridge the familiar and the unseen. The girls moved alongside him, eyes scanning the horizon for delicate arcs, glimmers, and tremors. Liliane crouched to examine a small cluster of stones, noting the faint vibration beneath her fingertips that synchronized with subtle arcs in the grass. Valkyria observed how reflections on a distant roof aligned with tremors beneath the field, forming a connection that was invisible to anyone not attuned to the rhythm. Katya traced subtle shadows weaving across the horizon, noting the alignment with tremors in soil and quivers in foliage. Each observation revealed a deeper layer of the extraordinary, a network that stretched far beyond what they had imagined. As night deepened, the horizon became dotted with faint, pulsating glimmers, like stars scattered across the land rather than the sky. Tremors beneath the soil pulsed rhythmically. Arcs in dust and reflections shimmered softly, and shadows stretched with deliberate intention. Carlos and the girls paused at the top of a small hill, taking in the full panorama of subtle signals. The extraordinary presence had woven a network across the horizon, connecting distant fields, rooftops, groves, and empty plazas, in a choreography of perception that was quiet, patient, and hypnotic. Even as the town below continued its routines, unaware of the faint signals stretching across distant fields, Carlos and the girls felt a profound sense of connection. The extraordinary presence had expanded the boundaries of their perception, showing them that the ordinary could carry subtle traces of the unknown, and that the horizon itself could become a canvas for observation, curiosity, and awareness. Each pulse, tremor, and glimmer was a breadcrumb, a silent message waiting for those patient enough to notice and follow. The children who had wandered near the grove now lingered at the edges of the fields, drawn by the glimmers across the horizon. They observed tremors beneath scattered soil, arcs traced in the soft grass, and reflections glimmering faintly from distant rooftops. Their fascination was quiet, but profound. Their attention focused on the subtleties of motion, light, and vibration. Even in their small, tentative steps, they became part of the choreography, their presence harmonizing with the silent signals threading through the landscape. Carlos followed the trail toward a distant grove just visible at the edge of the horizon. Tremors in soil, arcs in dust, and glimmers of light aligned perfectly along the path, guiding his attention, movement, and perception. The network of signs had become an invitation to venture further, to explore the boundaries of ordinary life, and to engage with the extraordinary in a slow, deliberate rhythm. The horizon was no longer merely distant. It was a continuum of subtle signals, a tapestry of quiet intention waiting to be traced by attentive observers. The girls moved behind him, tracing subtle cues, feeling tremors beneath the soil, observing arcs in dust, and noting glimmers of reflection that synchronized with pulses across the landscape. Liliane felt vibrations beneath her fingertips, faint but hypnotic, each one aligned with distant signals. Valkyria observed reflections across fields and rooftops, arcs shimmering faintly in rhythm with tremors beneath the earth. Katya noticed shadows bending along fences and trees, moving in time with pulses across soil and dust. Together, they followed the glimmers beyond the horizon, participating in a dialogue woven from subtle signals that spanned distances. Even the natural world seemed aware. Leaves swayed in deliberate arcs, reflecting light in soft pulses that aligned with tremors beneath soil. Insects moved in delicate synchrony with the rhythm of the land. Birds traced arcs across the horizon, their wings echoing tremors in the earth. Varginha and its surroundings had become a living canvas for a silent, hypnotic choreography that extended from the grove, across town, and beyond the horizon, connecting all who noticed to the extraordinary presence threading subtle signs through the world. As night deepened fully, Carlos and the girls paused to absorb the vast network of glimmers. Tremors, arcs, reflections, and shadows interlaced to form a hypnotic pattern stretching beyond their familiars. The extraordinary presence had revealed a new dimension of its language, demonstrating that perception, attention, and curiosity could extend across space, threading ordinary life into a broader network of subtle, deliberate signals. In the soft moonlight, the horizon shimmered faintly with glimmers, each pulse a whisper, a delicate invitation to continue exploring. The trails stretched outward, far beyond Varginha, suggesting that the extraordinary presence was part of something larger, something patient, deliberate, and hypnotic. Each tremor, each arc, each reflection was a step in a silent conversation that transcended distance, a dialogue between the ordinary and the unknown, waiting for those willing to notice and follow. And as the night deepened, the glimmers beyond the horizon beckoned them onward, a quiet promise that the extraordinary had only just begun to reveal itself. Chapter 19. Patterns in the sky. Night had settled deeply over Varginha, the skies stretching wide and endless above the town, painted in layers of deep navy and velvet black, dotted with stars that glimmered faintly like distant lanterns. The horizon still held faint traces of twilight, a soft gradient melting into the inky night. For the first time, Carlos de Souza and the girls felt a pull upward, a quiet, hypnotic invitation to look not only at the land, the groves, or the streets, but at the vast, suspended canopy above. Patterns were beginning to emerge in the sky itself, subtle yet deliberate, as if the extraordinary presence was extending its silent choreography into the heavens. The first hints came as glimmers that flickered faintly between stars. At first, they appeared as ordinary reflections of light, like celestial dust caught in the night. But as they watched, the glimmers formed arcs, gentle curves that traced deliberate paths across the sky, synchronized with tremors beneath the earth, pulses in soil and reflections along the town's streets. The extraordinary presence had learned to communicate upward, using the nocturnal canopy as a canvas to extend its hypnotic, curiosity-driven language. Carlos lifted his gaze slowly, tracing the arcs with a quiet, deliberate focus. The patterns were faint, almost imperceptible at first, but each pulse of light aligned perfectly with subtle tremors beneath his feet. There was rhythm here, a gentle choreography linking the land to the sky, the soil to the stars, the familiar to the extraordinary. Each glimmer, each subtle flicker of celestial light, carried meaning, a quiet invitation to follow, observe, and participate in the dialogue woven across the universe. Liliane, Valkyria, and Katya joined him, heads tilted upward, eyes scanning the sky for subtle patterns. Liliane noticed arcs of light forming almost geometric sequences between faint stars, synchronized with tremors beneath the grove. Valkyria observed soft glimmers, reflecting across rooftops that seemed to mirror the celestial arcs above. Katya traced shadows stretching across streets and fields, noticing how they aligned with subtle light pulses in the sky. Together, they saw the town, the horizon, and the heavens weaving into a single, silent choreography of perception and curiosity. The wind carried soft whispers through the leaves and fields, brushing lightly against their skin, threading a faint rhythm that mirrored the patterns above. Tremors beneath the earth pulsed quietly. Arcs and dust shimmered along the streets, and faint reflections danced across scattered fragments. The extraordinary presence was connecting every element: land, town, grove, and skyend, a network of hypnotic signals. Each signal required patience, attention, and subtle awareness to notice, as if the universe itself had begun to teach the art of perception. Carlos followed a trail of glimmers that extended from the grove into the sky. Tremors beneath the earth guided his steps. Arcs traced subtle paths along the streets, and reflections in scattered fragments created a visual harmony with the patterns above. The celestial signals moved slowly, arcs bending and stretching across constellations, faint flashes pulsing like a heartbeat. It was as if the extraordinary presence was drawing a bridge between the terrestrial and the celestial, showing that observation, patience, and curiosity could extend into realms beyond the ordinary. The girls moved alongside him, noting delicate cues, both on the ground and in the heavens. Liliane traced the connection between trembling leaves in the grove and flickering arcs of starlight, sensing the rhythm in both. Valkyria observed reflections bouncing off distant windows that mirrored the sequences of celestial glimmers above. Katya noticed the alignment of shadows across rooftops and trees, with the pulsing arcs, creating a continuous pattern that linked town, horizon, and sky. The ordinary and the extraordinary merged seamlessly in this silent, hypnotic dialogue. Even the natural world seemed attuned to these patterns. Fireflies clustered in gentle arcs across the fields, their pulses echoing tremors beneath soil and glimmers in the sky. Birds moved quietly in nocturnal patterns, wings slicing through the air in alignment with subtle celestial pulses. Leaves and branches swayed in response to faint rhythms carried through the wind, creating shadows that harmonized with arcs of light above. Varginha had become part of a living, conscious choreography stretching from earth to sky, each element contributing to the hypnotic dialogue. Carlos paused atop a small hill, tracing the alignment of glimmers in the sky with tremors beneath his feet. Dust arcs, reflections in fragments, and subtle vibrations in soil coalesced into a hypnotic rhythm that extended upward, forming a bridge of observation connecting human perception to celestial signals. Each pulse, each arc, each shimmer carried intention, guiding attention, fostering curiosity, and teaching the delicate art of noticing the extraordinary hidden within the ordinary. The girls followed the patterns, Mobin softly sensing vibrations in soil, observing arcs in dust, and noting subtle reflections in fragments. Liliane felt faint tremors synchronized with glimmers above, a gentle reminder that every element earth, town, grove, and sky was interwoven. Valkyria observed how reflected light traced geometric sequences across distant rooftops, perfectly aligning with arcs of starlight. Katya traced shadows stretching from fences and trees, noticing how they pulsed in rhythm with tremors beneath the ground and glimmers in the sky. Each observation deepened their understanding of the silent language. As night deepened further, the patterns became clearer. Arcs of light traced subtle geometric sequences. Tremors pulsed with quiet precision, and shadows stretched and contracted in gentle choreography. Carlos and the girls paused, absorbing the harmony of signals from earth to sky. The extraordinary presence had orchestrated a network that required attention, patience, and awareness, demonstrating the interconnection of ordinary life with subtle threads of the extraordinary. Children wandered along familiar paths, drawn by curiosity to the faint signals stretching across streets, rooftops, and fields. Tremors beneath cobblestones pulsed gently, arcs in dust shimmered softly, and reflections from fragments glimmered faintly. The celestial signals added another layer, connecting human observation to a broader rhythm woven across the horizon and into the night. Their small, attentive movements harmonized with the pattern, a quiet participation in a choreography that spanned earth, town, and sky. Carlos noticed a particularly faint arc, stretching from the grove across a distant field and into the edge of the sky. Tremors beneath soil pulsed softly, reflections shimmered in fragments along the path, and the arc of celestial light above aligned perfectly. It was an invitation, a continuation of the silent dialogue, a delicate prompt to observe, follow, and perceive. The extraordinary presence was teaching patience and attention on a grand scale, expanding perception beyond immediate surroundings to encompass a horizon, a landscape, and the heavens themselves. The girls traced the celestial arc along with terrestrial cues, noticing tremors beneath scattered soil, arcs in dust and reflections, and the gentle quivers of leaves in rhythm with the sky. Lillian felt each pulse as a subtle vibration, linking her awareness with the extraordinary presence. Valkyria observed how faint reflections aligned perfectly with arcs of light above, a hypnotic bridge between earth and sky. Katia traced shadows and tremors, in perfect synchronization with the celestial signals, understanding that the patterns extended far beyond the grove, streets, and horizon. Even the nocturnal animals seemed aware. Owls perched silently on branches, eyes reflecting faint glimmers of light in sequence with tremors beneath soil. Fireflies traced arcs in the air, their pulses echoing glimmers across the horizon. Leaves swayed gently in rhythm with vibrations carried through the wind, creating shadows aligned with arcs of light above. Varginha had become a living canvas, its natural and built environment woven seamlessly into the hypnotic choreography extending to the sky. Carlos and the girls stood silently, absorbing the network of signals that stretched from earth to sky. Tremors, arcs, reflections, and shadows harmonized with celestial glimmers, forming a hypnotic language of observation and curiosity. The extraordinary presence had orchestrated a choreography that required patience, attention, and awareness, demonstrating that the ordinary could carry hidden threads connecting it to realms beyond perception. The night deepened fully, and the patterns in the sky pulsed faintly with rhythm. Tremors beneath soil, arcs in dust, and reflections across town aligned with the celestial choreography. A silent dialogue spanning Varginha, its horizon, and the heavens. Carlos and the girls understood that the extraordinary presence was teaching a grand lesson: to observe, to notice, and to follow the subtle threads of perception that connected earth, town, and sky into a single, hypnotic rhythm. And as the night breathed gently over the town, the patterns in the sky promised that the extraordinary was far from finished, hinting at revelations that stretched beyond what anyone had yet imagined. Chapter 20. The Silent Symphony. The town of Varginha lay under a sky so still it felt as though the stars themselves were holding their breath. A gentle darkness draped across fields, rooftops, and groves, softened by the silver of moonlight and the faint glimmer of distant celestial arcs. Yet beneath this calm, the extraordinary presence was orchestrating something far more intricate. Silent symphony connecting earth, town, grove, and sky into a delicate rhythm that could only be perceived by those willing to slow their hearts and attune their senses. Carlos de Sousa stepped quietly along the familiar ridge, feeling tremors beneath the soil align with arcs of reflected light, bouncing gently across scattered fragments. Lillian, Valkyria, and Katia followed, their movements soft and deliberate, eyes sweeping across shadows that shifted subtly with the pulse of the earth. It was no longer enough to notice single tremors or arcs of light. They had begun to feel the rhythm as a whole, a quiet symphony weaving together pulses from ground to sky. Each movement of the town, each quiver of a leaf, each flicker of reflected starlight became part of a larger, hypnotic network of signals that flowed seamlessly into one another. The creature, small and trembling, stood at the center of the grove, crimson eyes glowing faintly in the moonlight. It was as if it had assumed the role of conductor, coordinating the silent orchestra of signs that stretched from the trees beneath their feet to the stars above. Tremors pulsed through moss. Vibrations traveled along roots. Arcs of light shimmered on metal fragments, and celestial glimmers blinked in soft sequences. The network had become a living, breathing rhythm, and those attuned could feel themselves woven into it, as if every step, breath, and glance contributed to the music of perception. Carlos knelt to place his hand upon a patch of trembling moss, feeling faint pulses echo through his fingers. The vibration was delicate, yet insistent, resonating with arcs of reflected light that shimmered across the ground and distant rooftops. Lillian crouched beside him, brushing a finger along a small fragment of metal embedded in the earth, sensing a corresponding pulse in perfect harmony with tremors beneath the soil. Valkyria and Katia moved carefully along arcs of light tracing across the grove. noticing how subtle reflections synchronized with shadows, bending softly through branches. Every motion, every pulse, every quiver was a note in the silent symphony, a thread weaving the ordinary and extraordinary into a single, hypnotic whole. The children who had wandered into the outskirts of the grove earlier lingered nearby, drawn to the rhythm without fully understanding it. Their small steps mirrored the tremors, their soft whispers harmonized with arcs of light, and their quiet laughter threaded into the delicate fabric of signals that formed the symphony. Even in their innocence, they had become participants, their awareness woven into the hypnotic rhythm orchestrated by the extraordinary presence. Each motion, however subtle, contributed to the choreography, creating layers of connection that stretched from the familiar earth to the vast expanse of the sky. Carlos rose slowly, observing the interplay of shadows, reflections, tremors, and arcs. Across the town, similar subtle movements aligned perfectly with the signals here, creating a town-wide network of perception. Leaves swayed in harmony with tremors beneath cobblestones. Dust shifted in arcs tracing reflections across rooftops, and faint glimmers of starlight pulsed in time with vibrations in soil. The symphony extended outward, touching the horizon and merging seamlessly with the celestial patterns that had appeared nights before. Every element of the landscape contributed, each observer a silent participant in a rhythm too vast and subtle for words. Liliane's eyes followed a delicate arc traced by reflected light along a tree branch. Noticing how it synchronized with tremors in the soil and faint glimmers across the horizon, Valkyria observed reflections dancing across rooftops, arcs of dust shifting gently in sequence with shadows moving along fences. Katia traced subtle pulses in leaves quivering along the ridge, noticing that each rhythm mirrored a celestial signal above. The symphony had become immersive, an intricate choreography connecting the terrestrial with the cosmic, the familiar with the extraordinary, and human perception with the pulse of something far larger. The wind carried soft vibrations through the grove, brushing lightly against hair and skin, echoing tremors beneath soil, arcs in dust, and reflections glimmering along the town. Birds moved silently through the trees, wings slicing the air in arcs that aligned with tremors beneath the ground. Fireflies flickered in gentle clusters, their pulses harmonizing with tremors and celestial glimmers. Every living element in Varginha, from humans to animals, from leaves to fragments of metal, had become part of the silent symphony orchestrated by the extraordinary presence. Carlos followed a faint tremor along the edge of the grove, feeling it resonate in perfect rhythm with a glimmer of light reflecting across a distant rooftop. The pattern repeated, subtle and hypnotic, as arcs traced across dust. Shadows stretched softly along fences, and pulsations in soil mirrored faint celestial glimmers above. Liliane crouched to feel a pulse beneath her fingertips. Valkyria traced a reflection in a shard of metal, and Katia followed a shadow that bent delicately along the ground. Each element harmonized with the others, forming a network of subtle cues that created an immersive, hypnotic experience. The extraordinary presence itself seemed aware of their observation, its crimson eyes glowing softly, reflecting arcs, tremors, and glimmers in a delicate dance of awareness and intention. Tremors beneath the soil pulsed more deliberately. Arcs of light shimmered with rhythmic precision, and reflections across the grove and town synchronized with celestial patterns above. The symphony had reached a point where perception itself became an instrument, every attentive observer contributing to the intricate, hypnotic harmony of the extraordinary. Carlos stepped carefully through the grove, following tremors, arcs, and reflections as they traced a path deeper into the rhythm of the symphony. Liliane, Valkyria, and Katia moved alongside him, sensing vibrations beneath soil, observing arcs of light tracing the landscape, and noting how celestial glimmers pulse in alignment with terrestrial patterns. Every movement, every glance, every breath became part of a delicate, silent music, a hypnotic melody orchestrated by the extraordinary presence that connected the ordinary and the extraordinary into a seamless continuum. Even the night animals seemed attuned. Owls perched silently in the trees, their heads turning in alignment with tremors and glimmers. Fireflies flickered in arcs that mirrored the pulse of celestial light. Leaves swayed in harmony with subtle vibrations carried through soil and air. The town, once merely a backdrop for observation, had become a living participant in the symphony. Each element, human, animal, plant, fragment, and star-woven into the hypnotic rhythm. The children, noticing tremors and glimmers, moved softly, stepping in time with the pulses beneath their feet. Their whispers harmonized with arcs traced across rooftops, reflections in fragments, and celestial glimmers above. Each small motion contributed to the overall rhythm, creating layers of subtle interaction that deepened the immersive experience. Observation had become participation, and participation had become a quiet music that resonated through earth, town, grove, and sky. Carlos paused to observe a series of faint reflections along the ridge, arcs of dust aligning with tremors beneath the soil, shadows stretching delicately in time with pulses across the grove. Leliane felt subtle vibrations beneath her fingertips. Valkyria traced arcs in dust shimmering softly, and Katya followed faint glimmers of light that mirrored celestial pulses. The extraordinary presence had orchestrated a silent symphony, and every observer had become an instrument in the hypnotic composition, their awareness blending seamlessly with the rhythm of the unknown. As the night deepened, the symphony expanded further, pulsing across the town, horizon, and sky. Tremors beneath soil, arcs of reflected light, shadows, glimmers, and celestial signals wove together in hypnotic harmony. Carlos, Liliani, Valkyria, and Katya stood at the center of the grove, feeling themselves woven into the rhythm, part of a silent, immersive network that connected perception, awareness, and intention. The extraordinary presence had revealed its final, delicate lesson that attention, curiosity, and observation could transform ordinary life into a living symphony, linking the terrestrial with the celestial, the known with the unknown, and human perception with the pulse of the extraordinary. And as the first hints of dawn brushed the horizon, the silent symphony lingered, a quiet promise that the extraordinary would continue to unfold, even beyond the reach of any single observer. Chapter 21. The last glimmer dawn arrived over Varginha slowly, brushing the horizon with soft tendrils of pale gold and silver, painting the town in gentle light. The night's hypnotic symphony lingered faintly in the air, as if the rhythm of the extraordinary had not fully left, only settled into a quieter cadence. Tremors beneath the soil pulsed softly, barely noticeable. Arcs of light shimmered faintly along rooftops and fragments of metal, and shadows stretched lazily in alignment with the early morning sun. It was a moment of pause, of suspended time, where the ordinary and the extraordinary seemed to breathe together. Carlos de Sousa stood at the edge of the grove, the dew of dawn cool beneath his fingertips. His eyes traced the faint glimmers lingering in the grass, on stones, and across scattered fragments. Each subtle reflection and pulse seemed to carry memory, a whisper of the symphony that had threaded through the night. It was as if the extraordinary presence, though unseen, had left its imprint, not just in the town or grove, but in the air itself, a residue of rhythm, a quiet signature woven into the fabric of Varginha. Leliane, Valkyria, and Katya moved silently beside him, senses attuned to every detail. Liliane noticed tremors beneath the soil, faint and delicate, vibrating in harmony with the subtle arcs of reflected light. Valkyria observed shadows stretching gently across the grove, noting how they aligned with both terrestrial and celestial glimmers. Katya traced the faint quiver of leaves in soft morning wind, a gentle continuation of the night's silent choreography. Even now, after the symphony of the night, the town and its surroundings seemed alive with traces of a presence that had taught them to notice, to feel, and to participate. The children who had wandered near the grove lingered at a distance, observing quietly. Their eyes followed tremors, arcs, and glimmers that echoed the rhythm of the night. And though they could not articulate it, they understood something profound had passed through the town. The extraordinary presence had left them with an awareness of subtle connections, a lesson in patient observation, and a gentle invitation to notice the extraordinary woven within the ordinary. Each small movement, each step, each breath seemed connected to the rhythm of the last glimmer. Carlos walked slowly along a path leading to the ridge, where the horizon stretched wide and open. There, the glimmers extended beyond the town, reaching toward distant fields, groves, and the edge of the visible landscape. He felt the faint pulse beneath his feet, synchronized with reflections in dew, arcs, and dust, and the soft play of shadows in the early light. The extraordinary presence had not simply vanished, it had extended, leaving a trail for those willing to follow, a rhythm to guide attention and curiosity long after the crescendo of the night's symphony. The girls followed, moving softly, stepping carefully to honor the rhythm of tremors and glimmers. Liliane felt the vibration beneath her fingers, faint but precise, echoing arcs across the landscape. Valkyria noticed the reflection of light on a fragment of metal, perfectly aligned with distant shadows bending along the ridge. Katya observed the subtle quiver of leaves in the morning breeze, understanding how each movement, each pulse, and each glimmer was a continuation of the silent dialogue they had traced through night and dawn. Even the natural world seemed to participate in this final glimmer. Birds rose gently from the trees, tracing arcs across the sky in alignment with tremors beneath the soil. Fireflies, lingering from the night, flickered faintly along grass and branches. The wind carried vibrations through leaves and across rooftops, synchronizing with distant reflections and celestial glimmers. Every element, living or inanimate, contributed to the quiet, hypnotic network the extraordinary presence had created, extending its influence far beyond the grove, the town, or the horizon. Carlos paused at the ridge, looking back toward the town bathed in the soft light of dawn. The streets were quiet, houses peaceful, the familiar corners of Varginha illuminated in gentle gold. Yet traces of the night's symphony remained. Tremors beneath cobblestones, arcs of reflected light, and the faintest shadows stretching in perfect rhythm. He understood now that the extraordinary had not been confined to the grove, the lot, or even the night. It had intertwined with the town itself, leaving a lasting pattern in perception and attention. The girls moved beside him, tracing subtle cues along the ridge, noticing the alignment of light, shadow, and tremor. Liliane followed arcs of light reflecting off distant rooftops, observing how they synchronized with faint glimmers along the horizon. Valkyria traced the pattern of shadows stretching across fields, noting how they moved in gentle rhythm with pulses beneath soil. Katya observed tremors beneath scattered stones and quivers in leaves, realizing that the ordinary had been transformed into a subtle, living symphony of perception. The crimson eyes of the creature, though no longer directly visible, seemed to linger in exhausted and full of quiet communication. They had conveyed something beyond fear or threat, a language of attention, patience, and awareness. The last glimmer was a continuation of that language, extending through the town, along the horizon, and into the sky. Tremors, arcs, reflections, shadows, and celestial pulses were notes in a final, delicate melody that invited understanding rather than demanded it. Carlos and the girls walked slowly along the ridge, letting the rhythm of the last glimmer guide them. Each step was deliberate, each breath attentive, each glance an act of observation. The extraordinary presence had revealed that the world itself could be as hypnotic and alive with patterns waiting to be traced. It was a gift of perception, a quiet invitation to participate in a rhythm that extended from the earth to the stars. Even as the sun rose higher, the traces remained. Tremors beneath soil pulsed faintly in rhythm with arcs of reflected light along rooftops. Shadows stretched and shifted gently in alignment with celestial glimmers. The town, fields, and groves hummed quietly with the residual energy of the silent symphony. Carlos, Liliane, Valkyria, and Katya understood that this was not an ending, but a continuum, an ongoing invitation to observe, notice, and feel the subtle interplay between ordinary life and the extraordinary threads woven into it. Children, adults, and even those unaware of the events of the night carried traces of the experience, in memory, in intuition, in the way light, reflected off surfaces or tremors, resonated underfoot. Varginha itself had become a living canvas, subtly transformed by the extraordinary presence, connected through rhythm, light, shadow, and vibration. The last glimmer was not a conclusion but a seed, a gentle promise that the extraordinary remained, patiently waiting to be noticed by those with the patience to observe. Carlos stood silently, feeling the earth beneath him, the wind brushing gently against his skin, and the soft play of shadows and light. The symphony of the night had faded, but its resonance lingered, a quiet melody threading through the town, the horizon, and the sky. He realized that the extraordinary presence had left more than Tresazit had left understanding, a capacity to perceive subtle rhythms, a reminder that ordinary life and the unknown could coexist in harmony, connected through awareness and curiosity. The girls lingered beside him, their movements slow and deliberate. Lillian watched faint arcs of reflection shimmer across dew-covered grass, while Korea traced subtle shadows bending along trees and rooftops. Katia felt tremors beneath her fingertips, faint but precise, pulsing in rhythm with distant glimmers on the horizon. Together, they shared a quiet awareness of the extraordinary woven into the ordinary, a collective understanding that the last glimmer was both a gift and a lesson. That perception itself could become a bridge to the unknown. As the sun climbed higher, spilling golden light across rooftops, fields, and groves, the traces of the silent symphony became softer, more delicate, yet unmistakable. Tremors beneath the soil, arcs of light, subtle reflections, and shadows remained, waiting for attentive eyes and ears. Varginha had been transformed not through spectacle or fear, but through quiet instruction, hypnotic rhythm, and the delicate presence of the extraordinary. Carlos, Liliani, Valkyria, and Katia turned from the ridge, walking back toward the town. Each step was mindful, each breath attentive. Though the night's symphony had ended, the last glimmer remained in memory and perception, a quiet thread connecting them to the extraordinary, to the rhythm woven into the earth, sky, and town. The extraordinary had passed through Varginha, leaving traces, teaching awareness, and offering a silent invitation to notice what often goes unseen. And as they walked, a faint glimmer caught Carlos' eye, delicate, soft, hovering above the horizon like a final note in a melody. It was a reminder that the extraordinary never truly leaves, that perception can stretch beyond the visible, and that, even in the quietest corners of life, subtle traces of wonder linger, waiting for those patient enough to notice. Varginha breathed beneath the morning light, a town transformed quietly, invisibly, hypnotically, and though the extraordinary presence had receded, the rhythm, the glimmers, and the silent symphony remained, a lasting promise that the unknown had touched the world and that it could always be traced again if one only paused, observed, and listened. And so, the last glimmer faded softly into dawn, leaving Varginha awake to wonder, aware that the extraordinary had brushed its world, leaving behind a rhythm that would quietly endure forever. Time moved forward in Varginha, as it always does, carrying days into months, months into years, yet leaving something intangible in its wake. The town appeared unchanged at a glance. Streets, rooftops, fields, and groves remained familiar, comfortable, ordinary. But for those who had noticed, who had followed the tremors beneath the soil, the arcs of reflected light, the faint glimmers in the night sky, life had subtly shifted. A quiet awareness lingered, a soft hum of the extraordinary threaded through the ordinary. Carlos de Souza often found himself pausing mid-step, feeling the subtle pulse of the earth beneath his feet, sensing faint tremors in harmony with memories of distant glimmers. Lilian, Valkyria, and Katia would speak of shadows stretching just so, of reflections shimmering across rooftops, of arcs of light tracing faint geometries along familiar paths. They never spoke loudly, never forced attention, but carried the knowledge quietly, as if it were a soft, private music only they could hear. The grove remained resilient and patient, a quiet stage where the extraordinary had danced through night after night. The dew in the morning still caught arcs of light in ways that seemed deliberate. Leaves quivered gently in the breeze, whispering rhythms that echoed tremors once felt beneath soil and pavement. Even the fragments of metal, bent and strangely resilient, lay scattered in subtle formations, catching reflections at angles that invited curiosity and attention. The creature itself had faded from sight, its crimson eyes now a memory, a lingering presence felt in quiet moments when the mind slowed and the heart noticed. But its influence endured, soft and deliberate, teaching patience, awareness, and the gentle art of observation. The last glimmer in the sky, the faintest pulse beneath the earth. The alignment of shadows at dawn, they all whispered the same lesson. The extraordinary never truly departs. It waits, patient, for those who will notice, those who will remember, those who will carry the rhythm forward. In Varginha, children grew up hearing faint echoes of stories, their imaginations stirred by subtle anomalies in their world dust shimmering just so. Tremors beneath the ground, faint arcs of light reflecting in puddles. Adults remembered too, carrying the quiet knowledge that something impossible had touched their lives, leaving no mark of fear, no sensation of threat, only the gentle, persistent reminder that the universe held more than ordinary perception could capture. Time moved, seasons passed, but the town remained attuned in small, delicate woes. The extraordinary threaded itself through mundane details. The curve of a street, the shimmer of morning dew, the rhythm of wind through leaves. Those who had witnessed the events, or who had been patient enough to perceive the lingering pulses, understood that the world could carry hidden music, a symphony beneath the surface, waiting for attention. And in the silence of the night, when stars glittered faintly above, when the horizon was soft and patient, there came the quiet thought, lingering like a note unfinished. If it had happened once, it could happen again. Not with fear, not with spectacle, but as a quiet reminder that the extraordinary brushed the world, leaving traces only those willing to notice could perceive. Varginha, wide-eyed and patient, rested beneath the sky, carrying memory in its soil, its shadows, its reflections, and its light. The story endured not because it demanded belief, but because it invited attention. The town had been touched, the rhythm had been felt, and the glimmer soft, subtle, enduring. Even now, when the wind stirs, the leaves just so, or a faint reflection catches the corner of the eye, or a tremor hums softly beneath the earth, the town remembers. And perhaps, in those quiet, suspended moments, the extraordinary is still there, patient, gentle, waiting to be noticed once more.